We can start anyway without Jim. Mark's not here, right?
Mark's not here.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Good afternoon. This open meeting of the Board of Appeals is being conducted hybrid pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Zoning Board of Appeals is convening in person and by video conference using Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that some attendees are participating by video conference. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. So I'm going to call to order this special meeting of the Town of Nantucket Zoning Board of Appeals this Wednesday, January 15, 2025 at, hey, Lisa, oh yeah, there you go. Thank you, Lisa, at 1:03 p.m. For attendance purposes, in the room, we have John Brescher, Elisa Allen, and myself, Susan McCarthy, serving as chair. And we have Lisa Botticelli is on Zoom. Can you just say here, Lisa?
Here.
Okay. And Jim O'Danny is on his way, and we can announce when he arrives. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as drafted?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, John makes that motion and Elisa seconds. We'll do a roll call on that. John?
Aye.
Elisa?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
And myself, aye. There are no minutes to approve. We should just, I guess, wait a minute for Jim before we start getting into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, I'm trying to get any department heads that are jumping online, I'm trying to get them moved over.
Okay. Well, let's give you a chance to do that then, since that's
I got
the-
everyone so far. Just missing someone. Yeah, I'm texting Mike Burns. He's. Oh, I meant Jim. Oh,
Oh, he texted me and said he was going to be 5 minutes late, so he should be here any second. So I have, who else do you have on for the department heads? I have Mike Burns, Drew Patnode.
yep. We have Jody Casper, Michael Cranston.
Jody,
all
sorry.
online.
Jody Casper is the energy.
Chief of the police.
Oh, sorry. Chief of police. And who's the other person?
Michael Cranston, the fire chief.
Okay.
Who was the second person you mentioned, Susan? I have Mike Burns.
There's Mike Burns from Transportation, Drew Patnode
Drew. Okay.
from DPW, Jody Casper from the Police Department, and Michael Cranston from the Fire Department.
And then we have David Gray in the room from the sewer department, and Rocky, I don't want to butcher your last name, Montez? Mayor Montez, I'm sorry, the health director.
Rocky. Okay. Health Director.
Okay.
And Mark Willett from.
Oh,
the
great.
water
I was just
company.
gonna, okay.
Mark Willett from Wanna, right?
Yes.
Okay. So while we wait for Mr. Mondani, I think I would like to start with Mr. Cranston from the Fire Department, and then move to Ms. Casper from the Chief of Police, then move to Transportation, DPW, Sewer, Wannacomet, and Health Director. Does that make sense? And as far as the order?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I guess, do any of the department heads, do any of you have somewhere to be that you want to go further up the list? Okay.
Okay. Billy, the only thing that didn't make the packet right was the thing you sent on the 13th, the NLWC review letter. Oh, it is? Oh, I thought you said the packet will not be updated to include this attachment for the meeting.
Maybe I received it on the 13th, you said?
Yeah, because I just pinned,
After 10 a.m. I received that thing, and I
did you end up putting?
no, I did not.
Okay. Okay.
I think I forwarded it to everyone.
You did. I just wanted to make sure I was correct in that. Okay. Okay, so we are going to hear first from the department heads. So Mr. Cranston from the fire department, if you would like to go first and I guess express any feedback you have on the proposed project, and then board members and perhaps the applicant may have questions through me to you.
Okay, so thank you and good afternoon. My name's Mike Cranston. I'm the fire chief. Just to back up a little bit, the beginning of this project started prior to my arrival here. serving in my position as the fire chief. The plans that were submitted have been reviewed by the previous chief, the previous fire prevention officer, a couple of previous fire prevention officers, and then has come to me. So reviewing all the documentation and going through the plans that I've seen, and from the fire department's perspective today, our biggest concern is that this project meets all the requirements set forth in 527 CMR one, which is the Massachusetts Comprehensive Fire Code, which is basically an amended version of NFPA 1. So, as far as our concerns go, the biggest concerns that were brought forth by the previous administration here, and I concur with them, are difficulties with access to the property. So we want to be very sure that the applicant understands the need to meet the requirements set forth in the fire code as it pertains specifically to access roads so that we can access the buildings that are going to be in this development. And the majority of those code requirements are the fact that we need the roads need to be at least 20 feet wide of a material that can support the weight of fire apparatus, that there's adequate turnarounds. As I said, that the roads are 20 feet wide and that's unobstructed, so that doesn't take into account any parking. It has to be 20 feet, including the parking. And we need to be able to access all parts of the building, and exterior access doors in order to get in the building within a certain distance from the fire trucks. And those distance requirements vary based on whether or not the building is protected by an automatic sprinkler system. But all of those have been included in the plans, and that's sort of the biggest concern that we have as a fire department, is to make sure that we can gain access to the buildings, that there's both more than one entrance to the facility, meaning the overall development, and those more than one entrances should be remote from each other, so that if there's an issue on a road, we have means to access that without being stuck in traffic. That's basically the biggest concern we have, is access. And then again, all of the other requirements set forth in the fire code would be required by this department.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone on the board have any questions for the fire chief? You have to put on your mic.
Sorry, are there currently 1 or 2 points of access on our most recent plan? And if it's easy to pull that up, I'd just like to look at it again.
My understanding is that there's the one access off of South Shore Road that's for people entering and leaving the property. And then they, like, similar to Satcham's Path, they have a not usable, but in a case of emergency, right, an emergency access point.
I believe I can pull up the site plan for
Would you?
everyone to see.
That'd be great.
Madam Chair, I just have to make a quick statement because we have a hand that keeps going up the line. We're not taking public comment right now, so until that happens, we will not, the chair will announce when we take public comment.
And Lisa, I see you have your hand up, so I'll get to you after.
Yeah, no problem.
Is it on the landscape plan?
I'm getting it pulled
Okay.
up. It's part of the initial submission in September. But I think the layout plan would show you the single access point. Hang on one second.
Okay. Okay, well, it should reflect on the landscape plan too, to make sure there isn't a tree planted in this second access point. Okay. What's up there?
So anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the only access that's shown on this plan.
Right, the second one, I think, Billy, is page south of that, and but to Elisa's point, if you pull up the landscape plan, not on the same page, it's that
One
break
structure
right there,
down.
that, Yeah.
Yes, that's currently located there too. You can see that.
What does that say?
yeah.
Can we see what that says?
Something foot minimum.
Anybody know?
But I guess my question to the fire chief would be, they are in such close proximity to each other that dump out onto the same road, South Shore Road, does that,
So yeah, that
Even
doesn't
if
really
this-
accomplish what we're trying to get. Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt you. But yeah, we're looking for remoteness. If there was an issue on South Shore Road, we
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to access either one of those 2 points. You know, the idea would be to have remote access from something that's significantly further away than that proposed reinforced turf emergency access that you was just pointed out.
right, and, okay, and my other question, well, I'm sorry, Lisa, did you want to finish? I just had a couple other
Oh, no.
questions.
I just wanted to know about the second access. Maybe we could zoom out and see if maybe there's another access, or if somebody just knows the answer, they could just tell us.
Sure, and you can see it. It
I'd love to
finally
know.
clicked in. It says 15-foot wide.
15 feet.
reinforced.
So that would have to go to 20. And then I think, Elisa, to your point, if you look at the landscape plan, there's actually some trees. I believe if I'm looking at the most recent landscape plan, they show some trees there.
But if the fire chief just said that that would be too close for
Yeah.
a logical second point of entry, because if Surfside Road is blocked off, it's blocked off 20 feet away or 50 feet
Right.
away. Is there some other point of entry that was presented to you, Fire Chief Cranston?
Not that I can recall.
Okay,
I
so.
don't think they have direct access to any other road.
So as of right now, Mr. Cranston, you're saying this meets the fire code, but it actually doesn't, right? Now that we are looking for a second access point and it's not being shown?
Well, I think it meets the overall, I don't know that I would go so far as to say it doesn't meet the requirements of the fire code, but I can just tell you from a practical sense, it would certainly be beneficial to the public safety to be able to have a secondary access that's more remote than the primary access or from the primary access.
Well, I know in a house, if you don't have two ways to get out of a basement or a second floor, there has to be 2 points for fire reasons. So if it doesn't have a second point right now, which it doesn't, it still meets the requirements?
I would say it does, but I would say it does, but it's certainly not preferred.
Okay.
So nowhere in the code does it say it has to
Not
have two
preferred.
access points?
Fire Chief Cranston,
that
can I
was a
ask you a question about the reinforced turf? Does that, I just want to make sure I understand it correctly. Does that have to, is that material acceptable if for the emergency
So
exit?
the material is acceptable per the fire code, meaning that it's capable of supporting the weight of the fire apparatus. The issue becomes maintenance.
Right.
That material is designed to, grass can grow through it. It's sort of like a mesh, very hardscape stuff, but it's designed so that you can't really see it. But the, maintenance and keeping those areas clear for the use of fire apparatus and other public safety, whether it's police or fire, or whatever, is sort of something that just in general has been an ongoing issue, not so much here on Nantucket, but everywhere. But so that's a concern I have as the fire chief, but it certainly does meet the requirements of the fire code.
Okay. And one more question, just to clarify, the 20-foot road width minimum, the 20 feet must be unobstructed. Just, I may be saying this wrong, I just want to make sure I understood what you said. The 20 feet minimum must be unobstructed, and the parking has to be in addition to that?
That's correct. So if they were going to allow parking on the street, then the street would need to be 20 feet wide plus whatever was needed to accommodate the vehicles to park.
Okay.
So
Okay,
one
got it.
other follow-up.
Sure,
Well,
Lisa.
well,
okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
that's okay. I just was going to ask about the parking areas themselves because they're not considered roads and they do have the 20 feet, I believe. But when you talked about access, turnaround and, being able to get in and out of each of these parking areas expeditiously, I was just curious about your thoughts on that. Some of these look like they actually have roadways around them, but some are dead ends. And then so the fire truck, I believe, would have to pull in and then back out.
Right. I believe the way it's currently configured, we could gain access to all of the buildings, which is obviously our primary goal. But as far as turning around, it would be tight, but I believe that, I believe it meets the requirements of the code as far as we could get in and out as needed.
Okay.
So what I was about to say was two parts, a question for Mr. Cranston. How many fire hydrants are required for a development of this size? That's number one. And number two, maybe this is more for the developer, but if you were not to come off of, sorry, I called it Surfside Road, but, South Shore Road, where else would you come in? Would you need an easement to have a second point of access on this? Because it's surrounded by private property. So how else are you planning on, if you can't access from South Shore Road, how else are you planning on getting to a fire back in this corner, for instance, if these two buildings are on fire?
So to answer your first question about the hydrants, it's really within 500 feet of any building. I don't want to misquote the code, but sometimes there are variables depending on whether or not a building is protected by an automatic sprinkler system. But 500 feet is a safe distance to say that is a basic requirement in the fire code.
And that exists here?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay. And I guess a question, and I don't know if anybody can answer, is the second part of that. About the other access
So
point.
I guess either Mr. Bracken or Mr. Haverty, do you want to address the fire chief's concerns about the preference to have the emergency exit more, he used the word remote, but, further apart or separated from the main entrance, to allow for exactly what it's for, emergency in case you can't access through the main access?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Paul Haverty, Blattman, Bobrowski, Haverty, and Silverstein, attorney for the developer Surfside Crossing LLC. The issue of fire access was very well covered during the course of the hearing before the Housing Appeals Committee. We submitted the pre-filed testimony of a code compliance expert, Jeremy Souza of Code Red, and I submitted a copy of his testimony and his exhibits to the board with my letter dated January 8th. And I think that addresses all of the questions, that have been raised by the fire chief. The emergency access location, it really can't be located any further away than it is. I don't really think moving it 15 or 20 feet is really going to have an impact anyways. I think that the suggestion that having an alternative access on a remote street rather than from South Shore Road, in theory, is a great suggestion. In reality, it's just not possible. But having the preferred access is different than having what is required by the fire code and what's required by safety. This meets the fire code, this meets any safety standards. It may not be the ultimate in terms of the absolute ideal for access, but it is certainly more than safe and adequate.
Will you go back to that plan, Billy?
I can pull that up. I also did get the landscape plan. Do you want that instead, or do you want?
Either way.
Either way. This is the landscape plan this time.
So what do you think the distance is from here to the entrance? From this place? If this place is on fire, you have from there or from there to somehow weave through and put this fire out.
Well,
I don't want to live there.
one thing I would like to note, and I think it's important for everything that the board is reviewing, not just the fire safety issue. This board has been remanded this matter to compare the modified project to the project as originally submitted. I would point out that the project as originally submitted was 60 single-family structures and 96 condominium units. The 60 single-family structures did not have fire suppression systems. There was no automatic sprinklers in those buildings. Every single dwelling unit in the modified project has automatic sprinkler systems. In terms of fire safety, this is in fact a far safer design than the original project.
Does he agree with that? Does the fire chief
I do agree with that statement.
Okay.
Because of the fire suppression systems and the sprinkler systems.
That's correct.
Does anyone have any more questions for the fire chief?
I do.
Okay. Go ahead.
I understand that that a lot of these regulations are governed by state law, which is kind of beyond us. We're kind of assessing our local needs, which would be anything health, safety related, and that's kind of our purview. Is there anything else that you feel that is unique to Nantucket that would make you, that would give you pause in terms of us approving this? I think we're going to talk about it later, but I think there's a water issue. If what is said is true, that the wells are shut down and there might be a water pressure issue. And we're kind of seeing that right now on the West Coast, where there's not enough water. Would you be concerned about that?
In order for these plans to be approved, meaning the sprinkler system plans for all of the buildings that have the sprinkler systems, they have to be engineered plans that say that they will flow for a certain amount of time and give off a certain amount of gallonage per minute. With that being approved, I don't see that as being any different than any other building on Nantucket or outside of Nantucket.
Okay, so it's not just the sprinkler system being able to handle what it does gallons per minute, however it's measured, but my concern is that we won't get the water supply there to administer that.
I mean, I can only tell you my experience here on Nantucket, and I can tell you
Sure.
about my experience off of Nantucket. On Nantucket, we don't have mutual aid, meaning we can't call a neighboring department to get here quickly to help us.
Right.
But that's everywhere on Nantucket. You could also make the argument that this facility will be more protected than most of the residential properties on Nantucket with those same problems, meaning lack of mutual aid. I haven't experienced a problem where we don't have a water supply there's certainly parts of the island that don't have hydrants. But where we do have hydrants, I have not had the experience or heard of the experience where we haven't had adequate water supply to extinguish a fire.
Even a catastrophic situation.
I mean, the biggest fire I can think of recently was the Veranda House.
Right.
And, as far as I know, we had plenty of water.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If that's all the questions for the fire chief, let's move on to Ms. Casper, who is our chief of police. And same question to start out with. If you could provide us with a summary of your feedback that you either gave to the select board or after your review, and any concerns you might have or things that you think the board should pay attention to in our review.
Good afternoon. Yep, Jody Casper with the Police Department. Like Chief Cranston, I too have come into this project as it was already underway. So just to keep that in mind, that it had moved along quite a bit prior to me coming here just over a year ago. I reviewed the more recent plans that you just had up. And like Chief Cranston, I too had just, we don't work with state regulations, unlike Chief Cranston, that dictate all the things that he just mentioned, but we still have preferences when we're looking at new properties being built about what we think will be the best for us to access the area and get there quickly. So the guidance that I would provide is really just based on that. It's just what we prefer to get into places quickly. And I also looked at that second access point and also would have preferred to have one come in a different way from a different end. I understand this property is surrounded and there's limitations in that, but I still say, for me, that's still what we would have preferred. Whether it's possible or not is something else, but I would still need to share that. Because what I can envision happening is someone pulls out of the main access point to the facility, gets in an accident, a T-bone accident, any sort of fuel spill, and that's it. So now how are we going to get emergency access vehicles either around that accident to get into the second access point? How are people going to get in and out of the facility, right? So that's what I'm thinking about, and that's why we talk about these second access points. Once we have a critical event occur at that single access point, you can see the challenges that could occur from that. So mine is similar feedback. It's a preference, may not be required, but that's just what I noticed when I looked at it. And as far as parking goes, somebody just asked the question, which is kind of what's unique to Nantucket that you see looking at this. And what's unique to Nantucket is we typically have more than other places, more people living in a residence than might be typical in other places, which results in lots of cars, which results in parking problems, which results in stored and abandoned vehicles parking in other areas. So looking at this, I see that an adjustment was made to the number of parking spaces. And I think that's great. And I do anticipate having some parking challenges in this community as soon as it is fully occupied. Visitors, third and fourth vehicles belonging with residents, I think could pose some challenges inside. And then also I would anticipate some increased traffic challenges around that already very busy intersection at Fairgrounds, South Shore, and Surfside. I think that that's already challenging there. And what I can anticipate happening is vehicles that are coming out of this complex trying to turn left to get out onto South Shore and then onto Surfside will back up into the complex. And then the last piece of feedback I provided was just making sure there was adequate signage. Whenever you pull into areas like this and you have a lot of buildings, just really important for our responders to be able to find the right building quickly. So I can't tell that, and I'm sure it's in the plans. I can't tell that from looking at landscape plans, but I would just expect that it would be very clear when responders pulled in exactly where they need to go. That's an overview of my feedback.
Okay, thank you. And do any of the board members have any questions for the police chief? No?
I just one quick one.
Mr. Mondani has a question.
I don't know what the process is for the assigning no parking on public roads, but would you encourage that on South Shore Road? Currently, I think you can park in that area, and it's a pretty big area.
So I think on South Shore, because we've had some other questions around parking come up on South Shore Road, it's actually no parking in most of it. But even if there were areas that currently allowed parking, if you make it no parking, then those cars are just going to go somewhere else, right? So at the end of the day, you're going to end up with extra vehicles that need to go somewhere. I don't know where they're going to go. And that's what we find. We're just working on the 2 fairgrounds lot, and those vehicles don't just leave the island. They're now somewhere else, taking up spaces. So it's a unique challenge to the island with parking here.
Okay. Does anyone have we're not doing public comment right now. Okay. Next, we can hear from Mr. Burns from Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you may recall, I was part of the initial review in 2018 of this project. I did take a bit of well, I had another employer, I guess, in the meantime, and returned, but I'm still very familiar with the project. I did have to refresh my memory about the traffic reports that were generated. As you may recall, we had 3 traffic consultants look at this project when it was originally proposed. The outcome of that review was a proposed proportional mitigation for 2 intersections that are of concern, and this project, it was agreed, would impact. The first was, as Chief Casper mentioned, the South Shore Road, Surfside Road, and Fairgrounds Road intersection. That's already an intersection of concern. This project, we had agreed, would have a proportional impact to that, and we did agree on a proportional mitigation contribution rate for that intersection. The other intersection that was of concern was the Surfside Road and My Comet Road and Surfside Drive intersection. That's also an existing intersection of concern for the community, and there are some initial improvements for that intersection that are proposed. And there was a proportional mitigation contribution rate for that intersection that was agreed upon at the time. After reviewing the traffic projections that were originally proposed in 2018. I'm going to mute myself for a second. Thank you. Thank you. After reviewing the initial traffic report and the projections that were done at the time in 2018, there were traffic projections for 2023 and 2025 that were done by the peer review consultants. There has been a recent traffic report developed for the Our Island Home project. So we do have counts that were collected at the end of the summer of this past year, 2024. I did compare those actual counts of 2024 with the projected counts of 2023 and 25. Although there was some differences, either higher or lower than projections, I felt very comfortable with the projections are useful, and the proportional mitigation contribution rates should be kept the same after reviewing that analysis. And again, because the projections did seem to be fairly reliable based on the actual counts that were collected. The applicant did submit in the wealth of attachments that are in the packet materials. One of them is the trip generation. The applicant has noted that because of the scope change of the development, there has been a slight reduction in the trip generations for the project. So I would note that perhaps there could be some discussion of modifying those rates, but I would recommend keeping them the same for simplicity's sake. What did change and what is significant, Madam Chair, are the 2 improvements that for South Shore Road and Fairgrounds Road, as well as the other intersection of Surfside and My Comet and Surfside Drive. As you know, prices have escalated significantly in recent years for the cost of materials. We do have comparable projects that have cost estimates currently. Mass DOT is assisting with some intersection improvements at other locations. We've used that cost estimate to recalibrate the costs for those two intersections at My Comment and Surfside Road and at South Shore Road and Surfside and Fairgrounds. The original cost estimate in 2018 for the proposed roundabout at that intersection of Surfside, South Shore Road and Fairgrounds was estimated to be $2.4 million. Based on recent cost estimates, that figure has grown to 6.9 million. And for the Surfside, My Comment, and Surfside Drive intersection, we used those same figures in 2018 of 2.4 million to address reconfiguring that intersection. If we use the same cost estimate for present day costs, that would be 6.9. Applying the proportional mitigation contribution rate that was agreed upon in 2018, that figure was 8.6% for South Shore Road, Surfside, and Fairgrounds Road roundabout. Applying that 8.6% to the projected costs of the intersection improvements at that intersection, the figure would grow from $206,400 that was agreed upon in 2018. And present day costs, that figure would grow to $593,400. And then for the Surfside Road, My Comment, and Surfside Drive intersection, the proportional mitigation contribution rate in 2018 that was agreed upon was 4.4%. The 2018 contribution that was agreed upon was $105,600. And in present day cost estimates, that figure would grow to $303,600. So my changes to those original comments would involve those proportional mitigation contributions that were agreed upon for those two impacted intersections. I'm happy to answer questions on that. I will note one final comment that the traffic consultant for the applicant did recommend an accessible crossing from the driveway to the development to the South Shore Road bike path. They did make that as a recommendation in their report. I just didn't see those in the final plans just as I reviewed those. So that would be something that we would ask to be modified to include an accessible crossing from the development to that bike path. So I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I saw that the trip reduction in the notes, and it's still just, I think it was it maybe 1274 to like 11 something? Does that sound familiar? It was still over 1,000 per day.
Correct.
Correct, okay. And then for the proportional mitigation rate to be readjusted, is that something that, who figures that out? And is that something that we have to negotiate with the developer, or is that something that is agreed upon and it just adjusts based on the changes? Anyone? I don't know who would know the answer to that.
It's something you can know. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. George Pucci from Town Council's office. That would be something that would be appropriate for conditions if you were to approve the modification with conditions.
Okay. And I guess for Attorney Haverty or Mr. Bracken, for the developer, Mr. Burns brings up the crosswalk, the accessible crosswalk from the driveway at Surfside Crossing over to the bike path that's not shown on the plan, but is that something that you guys are planning on pursuing?
I'll defer to Dawn on that one.
I feel like we've discussed this before, and I just want to confirm.
Yes, Don Bracken, the engineer for the project. It has been discussed, and I think, you know, we can't design it or propose it because it's a town road, but we're obviously willing to work with the town to make that happen.
Okay.
We had committed to that previously.
And you can request it, right? The request would come from you to ask the town to put it in.
Yeah, I just think it would be a matter of coordinating. I don't think we could technically show it on these
Right.
plans yet
Okay.
until it's worked out with the town.
Okay, understood.
Can I just ask
Sure,
Don
of
while
course.
he's up there, Don? Does this relate to the easement thing?
No, the easement was strictly with the sidewalk. I believe this is for a crossing to get from the development to the bike path across, which is across the street.
Okay.
So-
Okay. And so the sidewalk is removed?
Well, yeah, I think we said before, we'd be happy to work with the town in whatever way we can as far as putting a sidewalk on that side of the road. But again, that's all work within the town layout. Obviously, wouldn't object to any sidewalk being there.
Madam Chair, just a clarification. Just wondering, so all of these price increases, it's sort of a general question. Are we to assume that these are all going to be paid for by the developer? And second part of the question is, aside from these price increases that we just talked about, what does the town plan on paying for as far as the overall project goes? What is the town's responsibility fiscally for this development?
You mean for the
For the
roundabout
overall project,
improvements?
or what, like the town might build the new roundabout to accommodate all the traffic, but does the developer pay for it? Does the developer
Their
pay the
proportion.
town?
He'd pay, right, so the developer would pay what we calculated, what Mr. Burns was saying, in 2018, we calculate based on the traffic and trips,
yep,
the
I got all
8.6.
that.
Right, so if it's estimated for 6.9 million as of today, then the contribution at the 8.6, which may be readjusted given the number of trips calculation dropped, is my understanding, if someone can please correct me if I'm wrong, would be, the contribution would be the 593,400. But I see Mr. Haverty standing there, and I don't know that,
Contribution by who?
from the developer.
Oh.
Towards the construction or the cost of that roundabout,
So of 8.9 million,
6.9.
6.9.
sorry, 6.9 million, how much of that does the developer pay?
Well, based on the 2018,
Or with all the new numbers?
I
What
don't,
percentage? What percentage does the developer pay?
I don't have that information because I don't know
right,
what the
however,
adjustment would
it's-
be, but just for the sake of argument,
Yeah.
it's a number determined by, I believe by, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Burns, it's a number determined, or maybe you should just explain it instead of me trying to.
Or so, so the developer doesn't pay for all of the
No.
costs?
No, because everyone else in the community would be using it as well.
Yeah,
But it's
Madam
being
Chair, if I could.
caused by his
Yeah, but
development?
let's let the traffic transportation professional speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just to be clear, this is an existing recommendation for the town. So this is something the town has already prioritized as an improvement, not happening. Well, it has a prioritization in our long-range plan and our capital plan. The overall cost, like I said, is 6.9 million. What we agreed to was a proportional contribution. That was the 8.6% for the South Shore Surfside Road intersection. There's a second intersection at Surfside in my comment, which also has its own costs associated with that and has a lesser proportional mitigation contribution rate for that, and that's 4.4%. So, and I'll just note that this proportional contribution that would be provided, it is enough to actually initiate design and would assist with implementation of the intersection. So this would actually, to put it shortly, address the soft costs associated with implementing those improvements. It'll give us design and very probably all the way through design and help actually contribute towards construction costs, the balance of which would be from some other source, whether it be town, Mass DOT, Federal Highway, some other source. To be determined, but this will be essentially cover the soft costs for implementing those improvements.
Susan, can I ask George a question?
Sure.
George, you had said that the change to mitigation percentage could be part of our conditions. So is that something that as a board we can come up with, or is that percentage dealt with as a negotiation with the town?
No, I would
The
recommend,
8.6 and the 4.4.
right, I would recommend conditioning it in your permit, again, if you do a approval with conditions, and it would be based on your department head's recommendation and comment on the project. So it wouldn't be subject to negotiation, it would be something you'd order as a condition. the developer would either accept it or not, but that's how I would recommend doing it.
Okay.
Okay, one more thing, maybe I'm just oversimplifying it. So let's just say 6.9 million, we're talking about that. And so what we don't know is what everybody's saying is the percentage of that the Nantucket taxpayer is going to pay versus the state or federal level, I don't know. And then the developer, we don't know who's going to pay how much of that 6.9, town of Nantucket, developer, other entities, we don't know right now?
You wouldn't know, it's as Mr. Burns has said, is that it's a plan already underway that the town is pursuing. He doesn't know where the funding for the rest of it is going to come from, whether it be town funds, Mass DOT, federal funding, wherever they get that funding from, but you would know where what the developer's share to that is.
We would know that?
You would, based on his recommendation,
Well, what
the
is it?
department head is not a board member, remember, you're getting his recommendations.
Right, okay,
based on
so
his
what's that
review.
percentage?
The
Mr. Burns?
8.6 and 4.4% for
Exactly.
the two. One
Of the
is 8.6.
6.9?
Yeah,
Correct.
Well, it's a total of 2 projects, at least, so each is
Yeah, no, I know.
6.9, so,
I'm
yeah,
just-
so it's 13.8.
he actually
But-
gave you the figures too. He gave
Right.
you
Yep, I
roughly
got that.
593 and 303.
So basically, the developer will be paying, let's just round it to 10% of the overall cost of whatever happens with road construction traffic.
Only at that one intersection, the other one is only 4.4, the second
Yeah.
intersection.
Okay. And then do we know the percentage for the town of Nantucket yet, or no?
No, he said you would be exploring different funding options for that, so you don't know at this
Okay.
point.
At this point,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions
Uh,
for Mr. Burns? You do, Jen?
I do. The obvious question, Mr. Burns, is the way things have played out, we're now beyond that traffic study that was done in whatever, 2019, 18. Based on your review, do we need to get another traffic study? Or can we use one from what was just done with the R Island home, which actually used the wrong, they used the development that we approved, not what's being proposed when they kind of addressed it.
Wait, what? I'm sorry, the Island Home did a traffic study, but they weren't using an Island Home.
They used, for us, to extrapolate this, for the Surfside Crossing, they used what we approved, that plan.
The one that was not the 156 units, but the one that we approved that was,
60 units.
okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you might have addressed it and I missed
Okay.
it, but.
Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just to answer the question, we did, to understand what the existing condition is today for that intersection, the turning movements and whatnot, the total volume, that's what we used as reference was the IRI and home traffic report. Based on a review of those totals, I did compare those with the projected totals from 2018. I feel comfortable that the projections were done, they're fairly reliable to use now. It's very difficult to project what traffic's going to be in 7 years, 6 years, 7 years. But they did a pretty good job. Proportionally, the trip distribution was a little bit different. We have a lot of traffic coming up from Surfside area now. A lot of people use the boulevard and come up. So that was something that was disproportional, but just to keep it simple, the total volume at the intersection, I would say is fairly reliable. What was projected 7 years ago. It's fairly reliable for what we're using right now. My recommendation would be to keep it simple and keep those proportional mitigation rates the same, since the traffic totals seem to be fairly familiar. And although there is a little bit of a reduction in the trip generation for the development, you could do an analysis to figure that. But honestly, that 8.6% was a result of a lot of discussion between a team of traffic consultants. And that would require the same kind of team effort to come up with a different number. I'd like to keep it simple since the magnitude of the development is fairly the same, if not less, but the big change here are the construction figures. And that's what why I'm modifying a suggestion that we have a proportional mitigative contribution of those dollar figures that I had mentioned.
So again, you weren't using what they use, which was the 90, whatever we approved. That's what they used. So they didn't use this current proposal. But did you look at that in terms of traffic coming from using their numbers and running this proposed development through that?
I'm not sure I followed the question, but we did use the 156 unit development
Okay.
in 2018. The types of residential's developments are a little bit changed, and based on trip generation figures, you get credited a little bit. Apparently, if you get a multifamily, there's not as much trip generation. That could be argued all day long. And
Right.
because that could be argued all day long, I would say let's keep it simple and just keep what all the hard work that was done 7 years ago. Since I've compared the numbers today with what was projected back then, and they still seem fairly reliable, let's keep that the same. What did change was the construction costs because of inflation. So let's make that adjustment. So that would be my recommendation, Madam Chair.
Okay, can I follow up?
Madam Chair, can I just attempt to address Mr. Mondani's question?
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay. So Mr. Haverty, you'd like to address?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that when you're doing a traffic study, there's two aspects to it. Really, there's the current observed traffic, and then there is the future build traffic. So the use of the Surfside Crossing development was really going towards the future build. But they also did, as part of that traffic study, an observation of the existing traffic. And that doesn't matter whether the Surfside Crossing is the 60 units or the 156 units, you're still going to get the same number because none of those trips are coming out on there currently. So it ultimately doesn't really matter whether they use the right number at 156 or the 60 units from the previous approval. The actual traffic that was observed is going to be the same one way or the other.
Okay. And one more follow-up for Mr. Burns. I remember last time I learned more about traffic than I ever wanted to know. And a lot of the debate when, a lot of the discussion was about the grade of the intersection. And I'm not really hearing that on this one. So, if it got an F grade, that was a big deal. Do these solutions fix that problem? Has traffic changed enough that the grade has gone down? All these things are important.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, at certain times of year, there is a failure at the intersection, but it can be a level of service F, and that was factored into the trip generation for this project and contributing traffic, since it would create more of a burden on the intersection. And it's already an issue with not just congestion, but safety. There's a lot of bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users. It's a four-way stop control, but there still are instances where crashes happen. So the proposed improvements that we're recommending, the roundabout configuration for South Shore Road and Fairgrounds Road addresses all of those. And I would also note that perhaps there's an opportunity for a sense of arrival and gateway with the Center Islands. I have no idea what the potential of that Center Island could be, but something that the neighborhoods around that intersection can be proud of. But the recommendation does address congestion, brings it to a level service A or B, which is more than sufficient for operating at peak season, and it does reduce risk at the intersection. There's points of conflict to be greatly reduced that would improve safety for the vehicles that traverse the intersection, as well as the bikes and pedestrians that they use the crossings for the number of bike paths that go through that area, the South Shore, Surfside Road, Fairgrounds Road bike paths, and the transit stops that are all around that intersection as well.
Okay, thank you.
One more question.
Okay, one more question, then I want to move on to
This-
DPW.
We were brought up this sidewalk, and this more is a question for the police chief, but there was this easement for a sidewalk on that side of the road. Is that something that we should require? It seems like with that number of people, now accessing or getting to Surfside Road, walking, we don't want them crossing the road to access the bike path. And I just want to get your view on that. And you probably don't, I don't know if you're aware of that a sidewalk was proposed and then it wasn't. And I just want to get your take on that.
Right now, we don't have in our a long-range
Sorry,
plan
This was
go ahead.
for, through you, Madam Chair, the police chief, Casper.
Sidewalk. So can you hear me okay? I know I'm fuzzed out on the camera there.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
Okay.
fine.
Yep. So a sidewalk, sure. I mean, I would always advocate for a sidewalk because sidewalks reduce pedestrian and other sorts of collisions along the roadway. They do have an expense to maintain. There's always easement issues with them. But again, just in our world of preferences where you could say, well, would you rather have a sidewalk or not have a sidewalk? I would always rather advocate to have a sidewalk because it removes people from the street. So yeah, I would certainly support putting that in, but I understand the challenges around it as well.
Yeah. Would you say that's critical? Would, to include a sidewalk on the side of the road?
So I wouldn't say it's critical. What I would say is it would be really nice. And there's lots of areas around the island where I'd prefer to have a sidewalk where we don't have one and where Mr. Burns and other members of the traffic safety group talk about this, where we have areas where bicyclists, pedestrians are pushed into the roadway where we really don't want them to be. That's a problem all over the island. We have narrow streets, and that's a consequence of that, where we just have land coming right up to the edge of streets. So yes, preferred. I wouldn't list it as critical, but it's always nice to have a sidewalk.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Burns. I didn't know you were involved in that too.
Okay, so I think if we've exhausted our questions from Mr. Burns, then we can move on to Mr. Drew Patnode from the DPW, who I believe is on Zoom, correct? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good afternoon. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, like Chief Cranston and Chief Casper, this project started long before my tenure here at the DPW as well. With that said, I've had the opportunity to review the latest revised plans and provide comments to the select board, which I assume this board has reviewed. I am happy to outline the key comments I provided to the select board in just a moment. I also recently discussed the traffic studies and overall anticipated impacts to traffic with Mike Burns, and I do agree with what he just presented to the board a few moments ago. Beyond the comments I provided previously to the select board, the only additional concern I had, which I didn't put in text previously, and is also not necessarily different from the most recent between the most recent version of the site plan and previous versions, and also was literally just discussed, is that no interconnection is proposed or depicted between this development and public bike paths on either the east side of South Shore Road or the south side of Surfside Road. I would just like to note that I would very much support construction of pedestrian and cyclist accommodations for the inevitability that many residents and visitors will be crossing South Shore Road between the existing bike path and the proposed development. If you'd like, I can summarize the main concerns that I conveyed to the select board from a public works and transportation perspective.
Yes, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Great. I very much echoed Chief Casper's concerns regarding overall quantity of parking spaces and the importance of protecting South Shore Road from becoming a parking lot and thus preserving appropriate sight lines and safe vehicular movements. One note I did have was also that the plans depict 4-foot wide sidewalks throughout the development rather than 5-foot wide sidewalks, which is a Mass DOT and ADA standard. Generally, I feel like there is fairly poor internal circulation for pedestrians. I did notice on the plans that there are no curb ramps shown for ADA accessibility, no crosswalks depicted on the plans, no traffic signage was called out on the plans. And additionally, there's no sidewalks along the edge of the road on the outside or the condominium side of the street, near buildings 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Sidewalks are provided largely from condo buildings to the parking areas, but very few proper interconnections exist or depicted between any two condo buildings, or from, and maybe more importantly, from condo buildings to the shared spaces that exist on the plans in the center of the development. For example, if you look at the plans, I was kind of curious how people were expected to walk from condo to shared spaces in the center of that development, which is the location of a playground, lawn area, a game court, pool, and the community building. It appears to me that people would essentially be expected to traverse either grass areas or walk through parking lots and then down the traveled lanes of the interior roadways in order to access these public spaces, which is which is also not appropriate for those with mobility issues. Beyond that, I don't have any additional comments to share, but I am happy to remain available for any questions the board may have regarding the proposed development from a public works perspective.
Okay, so so the sidewalks you noticed were 4 feet wide, but its code or for DOT is 5 foot wide in a
Yes.
development of this size or this type?
That's correct.
Okay, and can you say again, you were saying about I just want to make sure I understand the sidewalks. There were no sidewalks on the outside of the condo buildings, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Are you talking about you're talking about still on the inside of the development, that they have access to their parking lot that has a sidewalk? Or
Correct.
not at all?
Correct. I was trying to envision living in one of these condos and going from one condo to the other condo, or more importantly, more likely, I think, from any of these condos to the shared spaces that are in the center. And it just didn't appear to me that there was really good interconnecting walkways. There are certainly walkways and multiples, I believe, from most, if not all, the condo buildings to get from your condo to your car or the parking area. But beyond that, I just felt like there were some walkways that were kind of lacking. If someone gets dumped out into the parking area and then is trying to walk to the the community building in the center, having people walk either down the road in the travel lane and even through parking lots is certainly less than ideal.
Okay. Mr. Bracken, do you want to address those comments on the interconnectivity and how an access from buildings to places like the pool and green space, shared space?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank
Sure.
you. Well, first of all, the width of the sidewalk, in my experience, 4 feet is adequate for ADA in developments of this type. Maybe Mr. Patnode could direct me to a regulation that says it's 5 feet, and I believe the town regulations is also 4 feet. I think the idea here is that, people would access those common areas. As Mr. Patnoid said, they would have to go through the parking lots primarily, rather than cut across the grass, and have to cross the road at some point to get to the interior sidewalk system around the open space in the community building. We feel, given the density and so forth, and the sidewalks that we have, that it's adequate in the traffic speeds and so forth. We don't see there's an issue. People accessing it, as I said, via the parking lots and having to cross the street once.
And then once they cross the street, then,
They can get to the sidewalk system that encapsulates the open space area
okay,
in the association building. And then there are sidewalks going down to South Shore Road, so we feel there is an adequate sidewalk system to get to South Shore Road as well.
and do we have a plan that shows and I think we got into this detail on when we did this in 2020, June of 2023. But do we have a plan that shows proposed crosswalks and signage?
I don't think we got into that much
You don't think
detail.
we did?
Obviously,
Okay.
the final construction set could include all that information.
Okay. And just curiosity, because I don't know, are inside a development like this, are crosswalks, stop signs, stuff like that, are those regulated by any code, or is that just development by development where it makes sense for the HOA to say that's where they want crosswalks and things like that?
Well, I think kind of both, and I'm sure
Okay.
that there are codes for that, and that is something we would obviously want to consult with our traffic engineer, MDM, on that for final plans.
Okay. Okay, so maybe you and Mr. Patnode offline can talk about the 4-foot versus 5-foot of what the regulation is. Obviously,
Yes.
whatever it is, we'll have to comply with whatever the figure is that is the correct one.
Be happy to do that, yep.
I mean, see, I totally hear what is being said about how, I'm thinking the same as someone's trying to get from way up here, way up in the corner over to the pool and cutting through, instead of taking the sidewalk all around, cutting through the grass, if there's not, or if they don't have sidewalks, and that being kind of, not controlling walking paths, but at the same time, adding more sidewalk is going to increase your impervious surfaces, which is already a big issue.
That's true, and if you look at the design, everyone is going to have to cross that road at some point to get to that area. So having a sidewalk directly adjacent, to their units or whatever, it's the difference between having short distances on a sidewalk as opposed to going through the parking lot and crossing the street.
Okay. Well,
should say
definitely food for thought for the board as we
Okay.
get into this deeper. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Patnode?
I just have one question for Don. What do you think about the idea of accessibility to the sidewalk with no ADA compliant sort of curb cuts?
Again, I think those details would be shown on the final plan. There's no issue that we can, provide that access, ADA access, the way the site's designed.
Wait, say that again?
So if the concern is there ADA access shown for the sidewalks? What I'm saying is that amount of detail is not shown in the set of plans. But what I'm saying is there are no issues with being able to design ADA access on those sidewalks.
So that could become a requirement of ours.
Yeah, and like I said, it would be shown on the final plans, yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I do think that if you're trying to get from building, I'm trying to scroll on my screen here to get correct numbers, but building 1, no, actually it would be the next one. 5 to 8, you're gonna be walking in the road. Or I guess you could cross the street and then walk on that sidewalk and then cross back over to get to building 8. So I am aware of adding more impervious material to this site, but I think having a better way of being able to walk around this neighborhood might be something we might want to consider looking at. Because there are going to be so many cars.
Agreed.
If they have to go on and off the sidewalk and into the road.
Yeah, and the parking areas are kind of willy-nilly, I mean, and some of the parking areas have sidewalks, but only for a portion of the parking area. I guess it's just where the paths come in. Like the parking area at Condo 6 has, a sidewalk and the spaces that are further page north, but the one right below that on the south has no sidewalk. Because I guess there's no access point from the buildings to those parking spaces. So if anybody comes out, they walk in the parking lot to get to their parking space or where they've left their car. Anyway,
Sure.
Don, just since we're on kind of parking, you requested a waiver to the extent required in order to allow for parking as shown, or do you know specifically of what, if there's a waiver of something related to parking?
I don't think there is a waiver required. I think that's one of those waivers that we asked for, and we talked
a
about this
blanket
last
one.
time. Because the bylaw doesn't specifically say how many spaces you need in this type
Yeah,
of
okay.
project, so.
Is that the same thing for walkways as well? You're not asking for a waiver because there are no.
Correct, and where this is a site plan and not a subdivision, the subdivision regulations do have requirements for sidewalks if it was, subdivision road, so.
Okay, and then this screening of the parking, so you're asking for a waiver on that. What is the reason?
I think that was another general waiver up to interpretation, whether the board felt that we provided adequate screening, which, in my opinion, we have adequate screening that meets the bylaw, if you look at the landscaping plan, along with the existing natural buffer that's going to be around the site.
Okay. And then can I ask Mr. Pednod question? It's still not clear to me what's gonna, and Don, maybe you can answer this, on the sewer connection and what you think should be done, and are the costs finalized? What's your view of the waiver, the requested waiver of hookup fees?
Is that a question for me, Madam Chair?
DPW or for?
I was gonna say, I think if the sewer director's in the room,
This one's kind of.
Probably David.
David Gray is here.
Yeah,
Oh, David.
I'm gonna move.
Oh, David's not, they're not the same.
No, I'm gonna move to Mr. Gray
Sorry, Mr.
next.
Gray.
So why don't we table that question for right now? And then we can move on to him. So does anyone have any more questions for Mr. Patnode? No.
Do we have till 4 today?
We have till 4. We have a lot to get through, so.
Yep.
Okay, so if that is it for DPW, then we will move over to the sewer department, and Mr. Gray is in the room.
I always think of the same.
So same, questions, if you can just give us your observations of the project, any concerns, and then obviously Jim has a question for you.
This one on?
I think so.
My comments are the same as I had sent on the letter. There have been a couple of changes since this project started. We have installed a gravity sewer line down the entire length of South Shore Road with stubs for this project and every parcel that we went past along the entire length of the road, to include Korea Lane and Trip Drive and all the other the side streets that come along in anticipation for that line to be made active. It's still currently, it's installed, but it's a dry line. It's ready to go with an addition of a pump station at the treatment plant, which was part of the hack decision on funding, or partial funding for that. The other thing I wanted to, before we get too far going on that, as far as the crosswalks that go across and the driveway accesses, before I pave that road coming up, hopefully this spring, if not in the fall, we would need to know where those curb cuts and the driveways are going to be and the bike path, because we're going to have Cape Cod berms installed along that entire length of roadway. So if at some point I could get an idea where those are going to go, so we can leave the curb cuts in the Cape Cod berms, that would be a big help for us. The only other comments that I had put in my letter referred to how we were hoping and looking to see how the sewers were going to be connected. And the preferred connection would be to the new gravity system at the stubs that we left in. We left 2 stubs on the property in the driveway access areas. So there is access to a dry sewer until a pump station is built. So, and one of the last questions I think that came out of the last meeting, I know someone had mentioned something about, I believe, the force mains. The force mains will remain in place across the property. One is active now, the other one is an emergency bypass if we need it. So those 2 lines will remain. There is a brand-new line that was just installed in South Shore Road that will take over as primary, and we'll still have a backup redundant line with those existing force mains that are there. I think there was some other comments at the last meeting, but I won't answer anything that I don't recall the question directly on.
Do you want to ask your
Sure,
question
so
again?
that's all, the whole connection thing's been resolved, I think, way back in the original. There was some question. And your recommendation is not to waive the connection fee?
No, the connection fee is all done by the Board of Sewer Commissioners. They are the ones that make the decision to approve the waivers or whatever. That's above me. There are going to be some affordable housing units within this subdivision, and they have a whole gamut of different waiver criteria, and that would be handled all by ultimately the sewer commissioners.
Okay, and on this, that one easement for the main line, based on what's shown here, do you have any concerns about accessing it if there was some break or issue?
What we would require access, and we have had many discussions with the engineer and the developer that if something was to go wrong, it's nothing in writing, but we have an easement that goes through there.
Right.
We just need access to get to the mains.
Okay.
The mains do have isolation valves on them now, something that we did add during the force main project, so that we have the ability to shut some lines off now that we didn't have years ago. But as long as and I've spoken many times to the contractor and the developer, that we just ask that they protect the area where the force mains are with, and they did put down steel plating over both force mains, so that when the trucks were going in, they weren't directly impacting the ground, so.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Gray at this time?
Did I see someone have a question on the sewers once they're installed in development? The town regulations would require that those would be gifted or betterment or dedicated to the town, so that the town would have sole control over them after a year's period. So there was a question that was raised on who's going to maintain them. And within the first year, the developer would do that, but once they're dedicated to the town would take on those, that is sewer extension that goes through there.
Okay. I don't have any questions, and it doesn't look like anyone else does. Okay, thank you, Mr.
I'll
Gray.
be here for that.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we have Mark Willett from Wannacomet Water Company.
Good afternoon, Mark Willett, Wannacomet Water. My comments really haven't changed much from what was put in the letter. Currently, under our withdrawal permit, we can meet the water demand requirements for drinking water and fire suppression and firefighting at this development. Yes, currently, right now, we have 5 wells. 1 is down. We're in the process of putting a system together to get that well back online. We're also deep in the process of a a new source approval, a new well off of Pulpus Road that should be coming online within a year, year and a half. So before the summer season, our 5th well will be back online. Within a year, year and a half from now, we'll have another well to help us. So even though right now it's a little touch and go with losing that one well, we're in the process and that well will be back on within a few months. More of the concerns that we have at Wanacom have to do with the impervious material and the stormwater. Looking at the numbers, and there are ways around it. Yes, it's more than 15%, but within the regulation, as long as the design can capture 95% of the stormwater, and it's recharged in a safe way that doesn't do any damage or impact the groundwater in any way. That's really what we're trying to pay attention with. There are developments on the island that have close to impervious numbers as this one, but it's looking at how it's controlled, how it's going to be maintained, who's going to inspect the maintenance, and to make sure if it does go in and when it goes in, it's done right in the right way, and then it's maintained for the life of this development, not just the first couple of years. It's forever. We're dealing right now with a lost well because groundwater was impacted. So, it's something that concerns us the most. Demand isn't the real issue. It's protecting what we have.
So based on what you're saying about looking at how controlled, how maintained, who inspects, making sure it's done right, making sure that the groundwater isn't impacted in any way, I'm sure you've been following along. What do you have any specific concerns about either what's proposed or things that we should pay attention to?
The only report I have is from 2019. I don't know how much the stormwater recharge has changed. The design has changed with the change in the project going from the single family to the multifamily apartment style. I don't think that, Don, I don't think that increased the impervious material that much. It's probably the same roof space. We're probably looking at the same numbers. The concern is just making sure that it's done right in a way that it's going to protect the groundwater. And maintain, these things have to be maintained. If you have these stormwater collection systems, if they're not cleaned out and not maintained, then they're not going to work properly. If you're not doing the right things to get the pre-treatment that you need, whatever contaminants are on those roadways and off the rooftops and off everything else ends up down in our groundwater. And it is in the zone too. So those are the concerns, just to make sure that it's done right in a way and that everything possible is done to make it right.
So we're going to hear a little bit later from responses from the Nantucket Land and Water Council based on the presentation they did last time, and then the applicant's response, and then their response. Would you be willing, or do you have time to stick
Yes, I
around?
can
And
stay, without
I'd
a
love
doubt.
to hear, like, if you're hearing the back and forth, how you would come down, or where you land on that.
Information's been shared with
Oh,
me. I
good.
have all the reports. I've read everything
Okay.
that's been presented.
Good, because we're still, and we'll get to it, but there's still a back and forth about some of the stormwater, I think they're called the stormwater standards, for lack of, I can't remember right now off the top of my head what exactly it's called, but I think it was standard 5 and 6 perhaps that are going back and forth that maybe are not met or met, so I would,
Right. They're there. It's all within our Zone 2 regulations.
yeah, so I'd want to hear
Okay.
where, because we're getting experts on both sides, so I'd
Correct.
love to hear where you
Well,
come down on
that's where
that.
we're kind of stuck. You're going to find people that say this meets and can treat the 95%, and then you're going to have people tell you,
Yeah,
and all I can do is hit a calculator and tell you if the math works.
well, that would still be helpful, like, it would be helpful to us as non-water professionals, and this is more your wheelhouse, if you could, that would be great. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? I'm sure there's some questions about this, yes,
So was it Scott Horsley who gave the report?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Did you read the Scott
I
Horsley
did. I
report?
read both reports. that,
Okay, and you read where he states, in his professional opinion, that the groundwater, the drinking water, the bathing water is going to be 3.5 times over the allowable level of contaminants.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
Okay, and do you have any reaction to
Well,
that
that's why I
compared
wanted to
to?
make sure, that's why we're going to talk about what,
what's gonna be said and done
Right,
to help us feel better about those other reports.
right. Is this something where, again, we're not water experts,
Yeah.
we're not the EPA, we don't work for the water company, but somebody like you would be able to see through any bias or anything leaning in one direction or the other, and maybe help us figure out what the facts are, closer to what the facts are, that are unbiased. That's what I'm looking for, because right now, I can't not focus on what Scott Horsley said about the 3.5 times over, based on all of the surfaces and how it affects our groundwater and drinking water.
Right.
So
Right.
that's my big issue, in case anybody didn't realize it.
Yeah, so I think if Mr. Willette's saying he's willing to stick around and we
That'd be
can,
great.
when we,
I'll be here,
when we
yeah.
get
I'll
into
stay.
that discussion,
Thank
I
you.
think that would be really helpful for us to be able to
Yep.
rely on.
That's great.
Okay, yeah, I'll
His
I'll be here.
expertise.
Madam Chair.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Through
Mr.
you.
Yep, sure.
So in our bylaw, in this, when we started this, the focus was on the permit and how much water we could
Right,
withdraw.
so
and
initially,
this
that was
wasn't
where
even
my
really-
concerns were.
Yeah.
Was with the permit.
Yeah, and I think things have changed.
Yep.
And we've learned more. And I think we were a little surprised when we had that presentation, which caused me to dig into things a little bit. But in our zoning bylaw, I think you give a water quality
Certificate.
compliance certificate,
Yes.
right?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't think I've issued one of those yet.
But
I'm, like you, going through all the material, going through all the reports, doing everything we can to get the information we can before I write that certificate.
And so what is it based on?
It's based on a developer and their engineer, and Don has supplied a report, and they give you a report that deals with 100-year storms, 50-year storms, a 500-year storm. They do a lot of calculations on infiltration and what happens when that storm event happens and where the stormwater goes and how fast it infiltrates and where it infiltrates. And then we have to look at that, analyze it, and look at if it's going to be more than 15% impervious material, such as this site and many others on the island, to be sure that they're getting that 95% recovery and it is getting recharged without having an adverse impact onto the groundwater quality beneath it. So
Yeah. So
it's a
I-
more, it's a complicated process.
Okay. So, and do you think of a development of this size is different than some of the other ones that Don mentioned, based on the concentration of building? Everything flowing into one area, and, do you look at the hydrology, is that what it is?
Hydrology's in there, and then that'll be in their report, and we look at groundwater elevations and how it's impacted, if there's gonna be any type of mounding associated with the groundwater that
Right.
comes, as it infiltrates back in through the system, the stormwater system, it can create mounding. And to make sure that's not, it's gonna adversely impact the groundwater flow direction locally, just at those locations. There are similar developments that are here on the island that have almost this type of density in a little bit bigger areas, but there's going to be one behind us that's very similar to this. Across the street, there's one very similar to this. The impervious material that's in here, it is a big number, and there are not a lot of developments on the island with that high a number. That's why we need to make sure that it's got to be at that 95% recapture and with no impact to the groundwater.
Are
Yeah,
those-
so the no
Jim, can I ask-
impact to ground,
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Just the one behind us and whatever, the other one you referenced, but are those,
Well,
all-
there are multiple developments on the island that are very similar to the amount of.
are they also in a zone 2? Because I think that brings
Yeah,
it to a higher level,
there
right?
There are some in the zone 2 that are like 80% impervious.
Okay. And are those recent developments?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
so, I mean, it can be dealt with, it just has to be dealt with in the right way, and we have to make sure this isn't, you get 3 swings.
You know, you got to make sure you connect on the first one because it's got to be right and it's got to be maintained. You know, it's got to have a maintenance record. It's got to show that things are being done.
Okay, go ahead, Jim, sorry,
That's all right. So the system that's proposed, from what we were told in the last presentation, really doesn't collect things like we thought, such as PFAS, such as biocarbons, right? It only collects the solids if it's maintained.
Right, and to my knowledge, there are no real stormwater collection systems that are going to eliminate PFAS. There are none
That
are
was
gonna
my follow-up
eliminate a
question.
lot of the VOCs, and, I mean, some things, unless you're talking about, you know, water treatment systems that are going to be built into a stormwater system, which is, I mean, we're not at that level yet. I don't think there's a regulation to make anybody do that. There are going to be stuff that you're not going to be able to collect in these systems.
And
To remove PFAS, you need a carbon source or ion exchange, which,
and that's kind of baked into what you think,
with no negative
what we
impact.
call good water going back in the
Right,
system.
we
It
want
really
the highest
contains
quality
all that.
water that we possibly can get going back in.
Right.
To remove anything that may be, any of the solids, any type of oil or gas separation from the parking lots, the oil water separators that are in the catch basins, things that can separate as much of the bad stuff out as we can.
So when I hear water quality, I think of pure water quality, but from your perspective, the reality is water quality means some level of
The
contamination.
best we can do with the technology that's out there that's economically reasonable for anybody to put in. In a perfect world, we would love to have mini treatment water plants at all stormwater collection systems, and as part of any development, maybe, you know, 50 years down the road, and we get to the point where you do a development, you're going to have to do and treat your stormwater.
Okay.
And I will be going over this with David, and he's, as we know, guys, the new stormwater department, working with Charlie and Charles at his office. So we're plowing through these reports and getting all the data with the new information provided and the new reports. So we're looking at all of it.
And in your recent presentation of the Capital Committee,
Yep.
you referenced some of these extensive systems that are going to be required
Correct.
per well, which is
One well right now is going to get one. We have 5 wells in operation, 1 waiting to get approved. So there will be a total of 6, but right now we have 5 and 1 is down.
Is that because we do have contamination, or?
We do.
At the deeper well?
No, in the shallow well closest to the Tom's Way property.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there will be a treatment system on that well, which is a backup well, which is for when Chief Cranston talked about the veranda fire, which was actually a really good test for our system. I'm sorry that it happened, but happened in late June on a Saturday, beautiful day. We had to turn on that backup well. It wasn't contaminated at the time. The contamination is recent. In December, we detected it.
But you referenced that there was a water supply issue in July, certain areas of the town. Is that a concern?
That was
if
through,
a
the
fire-
water supply was through a drought condition that was coming out from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we were close to having to put in water restrictions because of the drought and lack of rain this summer, very, very, very dry.
But
And
you're,
that's another thing we keep an eye on.
but you're comfortable that if this is built as it is, the fire department will have the water supply to fight a
Yes.
fire?
When we get this well repaired in the next few months and the treatment system going and then the new well, there will be ample pressure for the fire department to do its job.
And so the treatment at the well, at the municipal well, that will benefit, you know, conceivably, it benefits the larger population.
Yes,
And-
that's going to go right back into the entire system, so.
And so as the water collected at any development, the recharge that's then put back into the water supply
Yes.
would potentially go through one of these wells, the well with a treatment system, and then the other ones that may get treatment systems that will, for that, and then it further treats the water?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So if it happened to, if the water was actually captured by the well that will have the treatment, it will be treated. Our deeper wells are much cleaner and a safer spot in the aquifer below a semi-confining layer, which gives us almost a little bit of protection from contamination. It's the shallower wells and that, down to that 70 to 80 feet shallow well, where most wells are, most private wells are in that range. Usually people don't spend the money to drill deep. But that's, if any contamination from anywhere got to that filter system, it would take it out.
Your concern is that you'll pull from those shallower wells into the deeper water. So we gotta fix that.
We gotta fix the shallow before we hurt the deep.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? John?
I do. Through you, Madam Chair, this may not be for Mark, but just in general. So in the event this is approved and these filtration systems go in, whatever you want to call them, who from the town inspects them? Or who would, I mean, what I gathered here is that this would be a complex system and would need maintenance and would need to be installed correctly. Normally, if this were a planning board planning board application, we'd have the town engineer, Ed Pesci, would do it. Who would do it in this instance?
I know from the infrastructure that was put in, Ed has been doing the field inspections. And I know John Chesia is on Zoom. I believe he's had some back and forth with Ed about that. But it has been Ed Pesci doing the inspections.
Thank you.
And then the applicant would also have I assume some contract with, like an O&M contract with someone that would maintain that system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak incorrectly. I just have to double check how that's been handled so far. In terms
think
of
we talked
what
about it.
contract is in place or,
Yeah, I think we talked about it in June of '23.
during the
when we were
review
doing that
period,
review
and that's what
period.
I just don't remember.
I don't remember
off
the
top of my
details
head.
either, no. Okay. All right, so if there are no further questions right now for Mr. Willett, let's move on to the Health Department. So, and then we can circle back with questions once we get to a little bit further down our agenda. So we have Rocky, is it Miramontes, sorry, I wrote it down and didn't do it phonetically, so. So Mr. Miramontes, same question, if you can provide for us your feedback on your review of the project, any areas of concern that you think we should address, and anything that stands out to you.
Rocky Miramontes, Public Health Director down in Nantucket. The process included a review in conjunction with the Board of Health. The Health Department did not provide any separate feedback on the proposal, but did work with the Board of Health as they prepared theirs. Much of what has been discussed already today has been covered in the document, the comments that were provided by the Board of Health to this board. I think the one exception would be the concern around the potential contamination associated with stormwater runoff to private wells that were nearby that system. So there exists a regulation that's local that says that you cannot drill a private well within 100 feet of a stormwater, dry well stormwater system, but that does not exist in reverse, but the same risk is there. So the primary recommendation from the board at that time when this was being reviewed was that an independent consultant thoroughly evaluate the impact of the storm water runoff on these neighboring wells. Other than that, as I mentioned, most was covered. I think there was a question around when the proposal was read regarding lighting or whether there would be street lights or not. It wasn't clear from reading that response that we did receive from Mr. Bracken. Indicated that adequate lighting would be demonstrated on the final plan, but it wasn't clear what that was. Obviously, in an area that gets as dark as Nantucket, that's a concern for pedestrians that are out on the roads after dark. Yeah, and that is, like I said, as I mentioned, the comments haven't changed. Everything else has been, for the most part, addressed here this afternoon.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Miramontes?
I do.
Okay.
Do you think, I'm not sure if they asked for a waiver, but our own bylaw requires that there'll be no degradation in groundwater quality. And yet you acknowledge, as we now learn, that this current existing system that's being approved doesn't do that. And is this a request for a waiver? How would you deal with this? Where if it's true that the water going back in is degraded?
Well, as Mr. Willett indicated, there's going to be some level of contamination. So the recommendation, and certainly of the Board of Health, was that it was evaluated by in this proximity, and the flow would be evaluated by an independent consultant who does have that expertise, because that is not the expertise of the board.
Right.
But certainly a concern.
And do you think that there should be an evaluation by an expert?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what was indicated in the letter and notes that were provided back in October to this.
And what is that expert? What type of expert?
It would be an independent
Water quality?
water consultant, yes.
Yeah,
Okay. That's has that expertise in evaluating storm runoff and how it might affect nearby not only stormwater runoff, but to private wells, but also to the aquifer, as Mr. Willett was talking about.
Okay. Can I follow up with
Yeah.
Mr. Where's our engineer?
Mr. Chesia.
Chesia. I just want to kind of get your take on this. I know there seems to be a little difference in opinion. I mean, is what's proposed pretty standard? And is there not a system that collects this and we all just drink contaminated water?
Yeah, I would say the system that they've proposed is somewhat standard in soil conditions of this type. I think that it's geared towards removing sediments, and if you have a spill of oil or gas that floats, the oil water separator and the catch basins will separate some of that out. If you have a dissolved contaminant that's not going to adhere to the sediment, or certain contaminants might adhere to the soil as it travels through the ground to the groundwater into the well. If you have a spill of something that's going to move through it, it's going to move through it. I mean, the stormwater systems, if you read it, it says TSS, total suspended solids. That's what you're supposed to remove. There are some systems, some are proprietary that have like filters in them that do probably a better job of removing contaminants. You might have a carbon filter, you might have all kinds of different things. It's not a common thing to see. But I mean, this is the thing. Some towns have water treatment plants that all of their wells go to. So if something is a little contaminated, it can potentially get cleaned up at the treatment plant. If you have wells with no treatment whatsoever and something spilled, then you obviously have the situation that you have right now where a well gets shut down until something's done to, someone will look at it and figure out what that contaminant is and then develop a treatment system to remove that contaminant. And, it's a complex thing. Like I said last time, I mean, ideally, you don't have anything in your, you have a well in the middle of the forest that goes for miles around, and that would be nice. Look, Quabbin Reservoir is sort of the closest example we got, and there are roads going through it. But the system that is proposed is fairly common, and it has essentially two elements. It's got a catch basin, it's got an oil grit separator. Theoretically, you catch like I said, the floatable volatiles. If they float, they don't go through. And sediments get trapped, and sediments also collect some contaminants adhere to sediment. You pump it out and you clean it. But if you read the handbook and what it describes, the 80% removal is removal through filtering through the soil in the ground. That's the sediment removal, is through the ground. And eventually, an infiltration system can get clogged. If you get enough sediment in the infiltration system itself, they have to dig it all up and replace it. That's how they work. It might take 20, 30 years or more, but that's how they function. I'm sure in Nantucket, these have been there for decades, and they've had to replace them in places where, sand from road, salt and sand operations get in there. I mean, salt. I know you don't have as much snow as we may on the mainland, but salt is dissolved, and that, the sodium goes into the wells ultimately. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of what I know.
Just to follow up, Madam Chair. Should it matter that we're a sole source aquifer with this type of system? I'm guessing other communities don't have this, or they treat their runoff so they don't have to worry about it contaminating the system.
Well, I think other communities probably have similar issues. I mean, almost every town has limited places that they can put a well or a reservoir. I mean, everywhere is fairly limited. If you're an MWRA community and you get your water from Quabbin, I mean, that's sort of, you got that. I mean, down the Cape, I think is very similar. There's a big aquifer, Plymouth, Carver, all that area that's very similar. And I think that if you look at the Cape, the issues down there, a lot of it's nitrogen loads. They've recently, I think, changed some of the rules for nitrogen removal. I mean, in the case here, you have the sewage go into a treatment plant, so you don't have a septic or a massive, treatment plant for the site itself, which would increase the nitrogen load. But that's another thing in zone 2s in particular. I don't think you have a sole source aquifer, and obviously being an island, you have very limited options. Nobody's going to pump water from Quabbin to Nantucket, I don't think. But you're not alone. Other communities have similar circumstances. And I believe that the systems that people put in those other communities are something like this until there's a problem, and then they maybe start changing them at that time, or come up with something to address it. Oftentimes, I think we address something after there's a problem.
Yeah, we're realizing that right now. And then one final question, Madam Chair. Mr. Bracken brought up some examples of where the system's used on Nantucket. Do you think this is similar to those projects, or is it more concentrated? Is this distinguished from, say a 1 acre parcel that doesn't meet the 15%, 2,500 square feet?
I'm not familiar. I have his list. I did print out some of the stuff and I've reviewed all, the letters and all, but I haven't done a lot of work down there in Nantucket, and I am not familiar with these specific projects, so I can't really say too much about what they're about. He listed the lot coverage, but he didn't list the size of the lot. There's a lot of variables. Where is it in the aquifer? How close to the well? What kind of thing is it? What are the risks? Everything's a little different. A commercial project could be any number of things. You obviously have a bigger parking lot more than likely, but it could be a storage unit which has limited traffic and limited use.
Yeah.
There's a lot of differences. It's big. It's very highly variable as to what you get and what the contamination might or might not be.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions, either for the Board of Health or for Mr. Chesia? No. Okay, I see. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Mr. Miramontes?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you for your time. I see Mr. Pucci at the microphone.
Yes, I just wanted to note while I was sitting here, someone alerted me that the HAC granted the request for an extension, but only to February 21.
Okay.
So that when you'll discuss other hearing dates later on, I just wanted to let you know that in case you were anticipating maybe having further analysis of something to come back to you. But so the deadline now is February 21.
Okay,
It was like a one-sentence order that they just emailed out.
great. Thank you for requesting that. Okay. All right, that gives us a little bit of breathing room then. So I think that's it for our department. Oh, sure. Sorry, Mr. Gray. I didn't see you standing there.
As we're talking about stormwater, now the sewer department now handles all stormwater on the island.
Okay.
The one thing that we require and we look at on all divisions now is their maintenance plans. That's very key to us. There was just a recent one out on Old South Road that we had to take and comment on because they had roof leaders coming off the building and everything and dry wells, and we just wanted to, we seek maintenance plans from any of the subdivisions nowadays, just so we know that the catch basins are getting cleaned, et cetera. So the stormwater stays as part of the not like the sewers where we would be dedicated over to the town. The stormwater stays with the subdivision. We just want very specific maintenance details and requirements, so.
Okay,
And so that falls within your purview and
It does
it's
now,
enforced.
yes. I have a stormwater manager that handles all the stormwater, but that's one thing that we review every time the planning board sends us a application is we look for that maintenance plan.
and do you approve that maintenance plan, or you want to just have it on file so you can?
No, we look at it and we'll comment on it.
Okay.
And back and forth with it, and usually we do a lot of work with Ed Pesci.
Okay.
At planning, and sometimes I'll make changes if we ask for it, but we just want to see that maintenance plan.
Okay.
There's a lot of areas on this island that systems have not been cleaned, so.
Okay. So I guess for you, Mr. Attorney Haverty or Mr. Bracken, that's somewhat new since or 18. I guess we would include that as a condition then in any approval that we granted, or have you already been talking with the stormwater management department about maintenance?
Not quite clear on what the question was there. Certainly, we'll be happy to work with the DPW and the town to make sure that the stormwater is properly installed and maintained, throughout its history. I would note that the board can't require an applicant to go back to another board for subsequent approvals under Chapter 40B, but if the board wants to make it an administrative review by the DPW
I
or
think
by the
it's
sewer
the
department.
sewer, yeah.
You absolutely can do that. You can designate them as the entity to review the plans and provide that administrative approval.
Okay, so for
It-
the maintenance plan, maybe we'll discuss that at a
Susan,
later date. Yep.
Susan, I think I would make a recommendation based on the comments, because the initial comments from the sewer superintendent as well as the water director, we're not focused on these types of issues. So I would not save it as some type of conditioning that would occur in the permit process. I think you'd benefit from more detail about how things have evolved, like what the town is doing now in terms of various requirements. Mark had mentioned that water quality certificate that he has to issue. Remember, you're standing in the shoes of local boards and commissions and departments. So we want to make sure that anything that, either David or Mark might be requiring these days, that they're bringing that into your process. So I think you'd probably benefit from some supplemental comments, possibly from these department heads, in light especially of the specific issues and the competing expert opinions now you have
Right.
about the stormwater management system. So I would recommend that.
So then requesting the proposed maintenance plan that goes along with the proposed
Yeah, and
stormwater management, so that we can have it reviewed and receive any comments from Mr. Gray. And then similarly, anything that needs to be submitted for the water quality permit or whatever that was called.
right, and there were a number of listed projects where the developer is saying that it's analogous to here. It would benefit for the town to look at those and say, here's what the coverage is. This is a commercial project. This is a small resident. Whatever those projects are. In other words, it's not good. I know we're here on Nantucket and you know the story, but it's not good enough to say, the project back here and this one and that one.
Yeah.
You really want to get down about what the details are on these other projects. You can't impose requirements on a 40B that you're not imposing on other residential projects, but there's a wide range of potential non-analogous situations.
Yeah, no, I
with other
agree. Mr.
permits.
Chesia made that
Yeah,
point very
so,
well.
it would benefit from kind of a further analysis, identification of what these other projects are.
Okay.
What the permitting was, and at least I would be able to look at that by the time you close the hearing and can give you kind of recommendations about what those showed.
And
So I think that would benefit.
And we can ask from the applicant because they're providing that information.
Well, they provided a list that certainly the town can go through and say, okay, this is a 3-unit project.
Who in the
This is
town
a-
would do that, though?
I'm not sure.
Normally on any of the subdivisions, the town's engineer at Pesci looks at all of those. And
Okay.
then Don has done other developments where they provide this planning board with a stormwater management type plan and maintenance plan. So that's all we're looking. We're brand new. Our department assumed stormwater just a little over a year ago. So we are now very keen on the maintenance part of it. It's, as far as what's in the ground or going to be put in the ground, we'll look at that future projects, but maintenance is just kind of key for us.
Yeah, and remember, you have a situation where your hearing is open. You can have further comments from various town boards and committees. Just today, I didn't meet him, but I saw the person who does inspections on behalf of planning board permits. Billy can follow up certainly with there are other permits that are coming through planning board. What are their practices? What are their recommendations? That had not come up before, that you would have received some type of formal, comments and suggestions on that. One, just before I forget it, because this will be important, the health agent, I think I just heard him say he had recommended consultant review of potential effects on private wells. I would get an answer from the developer on that. It is, have they submitted an analysis on that? Would they be willing to fund peer review on that issue? I hadn't had that on my list from before, but it's just something that I heard now. It would benefit from clarity on that.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
I,
sorry, I just wanted to mention that Lisa has her hand
okay,
raised.
Lisa, I'll get to you in just one second. And then, so, Mr. Gray, sorry, one more follow-up for you. Did I hear you say that on projects that are being installed, you're reviewing the project that's being installed, the stormwater?
The initial review is
System.
done under the zoning board, the planning board. Ed Pesci does that, and then they will present it to us. One, like I said, recently on Old South Road, we reviewed it and we just had some questions on the maintenance.
Okay, so has Ed Pesci reviewed this one, and did he, no, and he has not given any comment to, because this is just with us, so we've got, so have you, so should Mr. Gray, sorry, so we're sitting in the place of I guess, the stormwater department now as well. So we're getting feedback from Chesia. Have you looked at the system as well to provide feedback? Or I know you had comments on sewer, but we haven't talked to you specifically about the stormwater treatment part of it.
We were not doing the stormwater at the time.
Yeah, but I mean
You
now.
know, with what, I don't know how far back we can look or go. That's a question I would probably let Mr. Pesci say.
Well, it's
but,
not, it's not installed yet, is it?
The stormwater system? It is installed.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, I did want to point out that the operations and maintenance plan has been submitted, and it's already been reviewed by Mr. Chesia.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm not loving the state of the information because we're sort of getting kind of bits and pieces. So maybe between now and the next hearing session, David can get together with Mark, and it doesn't have to be a book that they hand you, but
I'm
one
just
should
saying-
an email saying,
I'm
here's,
just-
here's what we recommend, or,
No,
here's the state of the information, here's unanswered questions I have from what was submitted, type of thing.
Yes.
Some type of supplemental submission on these issues.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if the maintenance plan, if it exists, which it does, and Chesia has reviewed it, we should also ask Mr. Gray's office to review it as
Exactly,
well.
yeah.
Right, okay.
And Mark had indicated earlier, he's obviously very interested in
Yeah.
this discussion, what was presented by the Land Council, what Mr. Brackett's response was to that, and you're not ready to resolve the issues today, but, you're going to want to hear from your department heads further on these competing expert opinions as.
Yeah, so that's actually where I'd like to go next is,
Can I ask my one question?
oh, yeah,
Susan?
sorry, Lisa, sorry. Yes,
Very
please.
simple question for David Gray or whoever. I know you review the maintenance plan. Does the maintenance get inspected over time? Or is it just you review the plan and then the assumption is it just takes place?
Again, like I said, we're relatively new. We're currently developing stormwater regulations. We just want to see a yearly report saying we cleaned 16 catch basins, removed half a ton of sand or whatever. Like that's, as of right now, we don't have any stormwater regulations in place. The Board of Health has some small stuff, but Mark reviews a lot of them. But going forward, we're going to be seeking just a yearly report saying, hey, we cleaned it, or every 2 years.
Yeah,
We
so
don't see any of that right now, so.
right, and it's based on obviously trust that it's taken place. There's no physical inspection like there might be for, other departments that go out every year to make sure everything's compliant.
Not as of now. That could very well become part of our regulations for sure.
Well, it feels like if it's something like stormwater that has the potential of contaminating our aquifer, it might not be a bad idea to have some way of verifying
We'll
that
take that into
the maintenance
consideration,
is taking
sure.
place.
Yep.
Thank you.
Question of,
Yeah, and then let's move on to,
what about the option of the stormwater system tying into the sewer?
That's against regulation. They don't, you know.
Our
Well,
own
No, against state regulation. We're actually in the process of trying to remove more stormwater from the sewer systems.
I know, but we could also treat it, and this would
Well,
solve all that.
we'd have to build a plant 3 times the size of what we have, so.
Okay,
Billy, I
thank you.
see you have your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you all know the operation and maintenance plan is under the 9.5 materials on the agenda.
Okay.
It was one of the, as part of their initial submission. It's a site plan, so you have to zoom in because all the notes are very small in the bottom left corner, but it is on there.
Wait, I'm sorry, the maintenance plan?
The operation and maintenance plan.
The O&M plan, okay.
Just for clarity, there is a separate document for the operation and maintenance that goes with the drainage calcs and hydrology report. It's
Okay.
a full document.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Okay.
Madam Chair, just one request for Billy, because do we have planning board representative here?
No.
Okay. Can we see, has the planning board ever rejected a stormwater system based on these in a wellhead to?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. The way it typically works is Ed Pesci does the review. Then there's typically back and forth with the applicant's engineer, because at least with my experience, Ed will do his review, then he's gonna have a number of comments that he wants addressed before it can move forward with the planning board, really. We might open it up at a meeting, but we're pretty good about putting it on there that the town's consulting engineers, questions haven't been addressed yet.
I think we should follow their same process.
Well, I feel like
then,
that's what
right?
we've been doing with Chesia, right?
Yes, that's what John's our consulting engineer here. John is basically the ZBA's Ed Pesci in
Yeah.
this process.
Okay. Okay, so since it's 3:15, we have 45 minutes left, so I'd like to hear from, if the applicant has anything to say at this point.
Madam Chair, I did submit a letter dated January 8th, covered a number of issues that have already been discussed. I don't really feel the need to get into it in any further detail.
Okay.
But we also did submit responses from Don Bracken to the Board of Health comments, to Mr. Horsley's comments, and to Mr. Reardon's comments. And Don, do you want to go over those responses? Thank you.
Thank you. I think a lot of my responses, as I go through them, will answer what appear to be still some unanswered questions regarding the drainage. I'll go through the Reardon report first. I'm just going to go through the red responses as we go through it. Everyone, I assume, is familiar with the comments, and you saw the presentation last time. We didn't have a chance to adequately respond. The first issue that came up was whether or not this site constituted a site of higher pollutant loads, which triggers some other treatment categories, according to Mr. Reardon. And he based that on the fact that the traffic study had more than 1,000 trips per day going into the site. Our response to that, and I think it's pretty clear, is that it doesn't fall within that category. What was not included in his letter was the following sentence that refers to shopping centers, malls, large office parks, typically having high-intensity use parking lots. So that standard number 5, that's what that applies to. We have 9 separate parking lots with each with their own separate drainage systems. Each building has 2 infiltration systems for the roof runoff. So there's like 45 different infiltration systems spread out throughout the site. We don't have one concentrated location for drainage that has to be treated. We also even discussed this with our traffic engineer and his opinion of high-intensity use parking lots, and I believe there's something in AASHTO about definitions for that in residential areas with small turnovers, which these parking lots would have, shouldn't have to meet that standard. And again, that's a item that we checked off in our stormwater report, and I believe Mr. Chessie agreed with when he reviewed the report. But besides that, the requirements, to meet the requirements in that area require that you treat the first 1 inch of runoff. He states we didn't demonstrate that, but we did in the calculations with diverter manholes going to the oil grit separators. The calculations show that we treat at least 1 inch of runoff with the system that we do have. The other statement is that the project must provide its water quality treatment listed in the categories. Basically, what he's saying is what we're proposing is a catch basin into an oil grit separator into an infiltration system. He's saying that in order to meet the requirements, we would have to have some kind of vegetation system to treat it. We disagree with that. The requirement is the 44% TSS removal, which we obtain with what we're proposing prior to the infiltration system. And I think it's important to note that most of the systems that we've designed and others have designed on the island in Zone 2s have almost identical or similar types of systems. There are very few systems that have been designed treating the runoff the way that he's stating it needs to be treated. So some comments are that the plan should be modified to make this work. We obviously don't feel that they need to be modified. And then on page 4, I think this is important, and it's come up several times. The wording of the bylaw, says that it will not result in the degradation of groundwater quality. Well, again, this has been the accepted standard, to meet the requirements of this bylaw. Not only that, but the bylaw reads on and refers to the Massachusetts Stormwater Standards Handbook. And it says, any person or firm proposing land uses which exceeds the thresholds of the subsection shall apply the practices and technologies found in the publication. Which in itself indicates that if you meet those standards, then you meet the test of no degradation to groundwater quality. Now, I did note, obviously, that, most projects in Nantucket exceed the 15%, as we know. I note in my letter about the fact that water quality certificates are required when you exceed the 15%. You also note that, many projects, as Mr. Willett said, are typical in this design and receive the water quality certificate because we meet the standards that are in place today. Obviously, as we've heard, there are other ways to treat it and remove more of the pollutants. But, as far as, designing an engineered plan, our goal is to design it according to the standards. One thing that I find very misleading in this letter, and Mr. Horsley's, is, they keep saying that you can't go beyond the 15%. Again, we're trying to emphasize the point that it doesn't say you can't go beyond the 15%. It just says that you can if you provide the proper recharge, again, which we're doing. And then at the end of this letter, in Mr. Horsley's letter, I did provide an exhibit. I went through these projects, and this is just a sample list. These I came up with at the top of my head. Projects, half of these we probably did in our office, and the other half I was familiar with. And the only point to this was to demonstrate how many projects on the island, that exceed that amount. And, some of you may or may not be familiar with some of these projects. Obviously, the one I put at the top of the list, which most people should be, is Tacoma Green Affordable Renting Housing, which I think is about 64 units or so. Very similar type of coverage. They provide groundwater recharge the same as we're providing groundwater recharge. And then I think when I addressed Mr. Horsley's letter, it's pretty much the same type of comments. The only thing I think I will say in general is that, the way that this bylaw has been interpreted, He's saying that you have to provide 95% of the precipitation. And of course, there will be precipitation that's lost due to evaporation, puddles, landscaping, and so forth. The way that, in my experience, this bylaw has been interpreted is you just recharge all of the site. You recharge up to 95 of all the impervious areas. Again, I think if you go through any of the past projects that have been already reviewed, already approved, and already built, you'll find that with those as well. It'd be virtually impossible to recharge 95% on any project if you took his interpretation. I think, I didn't want to go through every statement, but I think I've answered most of their comments that came up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I have a question. So do you think there should be no wellhead to regulations?
Oh, no, not at all. What I'm saying
What
is
you're
that.
saying is, we have them, we just don't follow.
No, we are following. That is what I'm saying, is we have followed the regulations. We comply with the regulations by the fact that we comply with the stormwater standards.
Right, and those, we had a standard that when women were pregnant, that they should smoke. And it seems like you would be of the argument, once we found out that smoking wasn't good for pregnant women, that we would keep doing it, because what we know now should have nothing to do with, the regulations haven't caught up with it.
But
And, what we know now is we're drinking polluted water. And maybe we didn't know it back when you did the other 5.
Well, I don't disagree that more can obviously be done. Well, as I said originally, we can only design according to the current regulations, in which we have in all, as recently as Monday night, projects in front of the planning board designed the same way. So I don't think you can single out this project and hold us, to other standards.
I was going to ask, Mr. Chesia, did you have a chance to look over these submissions, the letter and the response from Bracken, and then right now we're just talking about Reardon, but both of the responses that came back, I'd be interested to hear where you come down on the arguments made and Mr. Bracken's responses.
Sure. I did read them. Obviously, there's a lot of information there. So I do think actually that the site could be considered a LUPL based on the trips. I don't necessarily agree with Mr. Bracken on that. However, the what's been done on the design end for a LUPL and for a critical area, it lists essentially the same thing, where you put in what they did with the catch basin, oil grit, oil water grit separator system. That's sort of, when you look at the handbook, that's the same. They have a little table, what's allowed, and those are what's allowed, assuming that, excuse me, the actual treatment is in the soil. So they tell you what to do for TSS removal. Those 2 units, catch basin and oil grit separator, are what they call pre-treatment units. And the treatment is the filter of the soil that the infiltration system infiltrates into. So if you do that through the handbook, if it were a LUPL, it would still meet that. But I do think after reading all this, I didn't have the traffic report when I looked at it initially. I'm not a traffic engineer, so I didn't realize it was that much traffic. But I have other projects that are residential in nature, even 40Bs. If they were over 1,000, they were considered a LUPL. One I worked on, they actually reduced it to be like 998 trips and said that it isn't anymore. But other than that, I mean, I think what I've commented on so far doesn't change much by these. That's the only change I would make, is I do think it's a level.
Yeah, that in a written letter.
Okay. Can you, yeah, I think that response is important because that changes, I think that's an important designation. So could you perhaps provide us a written record of that
Sure.
opinion? Okay. Okay. Mr. Bracken, do you want to go through Holsley's letter?
I did pretty quickly, and it was, I thought I did cover it in a
Oh,
general
did you
way.
just cover it in that one too? Sorry. And so again, then I guess Chessie had the same question then for the Holsley letter, and then we'll ask the Land and Water Council to respond.
So I did read the letter from Horsley. I read the response. I mean, this, I think, again, what I have in my comment letter and what I've said is certainly, as he brought up, there are definitely issues as far as what the regulations require for treatment. If something gets in the groundwater, then these systems, depending upon the type of pollutant it is, it doesn't pick them up. Can there be degradation? There can be. I'm not going to say that there isn't going to be. But under the guidelines I used or the regulations I reviewed under, he provides a common system that has been used, I'm sure, on Nantucket and pretty much throughout the state. So everybody's in sort of a bind here, frankly, because you see something and it potentially can impact the wells, but is it something that you can rule on differently than everything else? That's pretty much where we are.
Okay. Elisa, you have a question, and then Jim, I will get to you.
I feel like everybody's being so nonchalant about the water quality all of a sudden, like, it's what we did and it's what we have, these other projects we're following for these other projects. And, if there's contaminants, we'll deal with it when we get to it. No. I want to go back to the sense of urgency and the severity of what a highly accredited specialist, Scott Horsley, told us, that this water is going to be 3.5 times over the allowed contamination levels. Why are we acting like, well, maybe if there's some contaminants? No. I almost want to go back and replay Mr. Horsley's assessment of the situation, because I feel like we're a little lopsided on, we've got a lot of experts, doing their job, rooting for the developer, but I'm thinking of the people of Nantucket that are going to be living there and their health and their well-being and their safety. And I can't unhear what he said. And this is a sense of urgency that no one is addressing. That's all.
Jim, did you have a question?
I had a question for George. This is a little unique, and I realize the developer's position is either this is the standard, or the regulations haven't been changed, therefore we don't need to comply with it. But I don't look at this as like a building code change that maybe they don't have to comply with. I mean, what Elise is talking about And maybe this is the first example, or that we apply. How do we distinguish that?
Yeah, I think it's a little different. I think the developer is arguing, I think Donna is arguing that they are complying, that the existing regulations are sufficient, they're state-of-the-art, and they're complying with them, as opposed to they're either not complying or they're complying with something that's inadequate. I think having said that, that's why I said earlier, your process would definitely benefit from further input, because right now you have a situation where, you know, the opponents to this proposal are saying this doesn't comply with existing standards. They're not saying that, you know, you should apply something more than exists under your regulatory authority. They're saying they don't agree with the developer and the proposal, and they're pointing out where they say it's inadequate. You know, one of the things obviously they're getting at too is the potential benefit from lessened density. That's obvious. Right. You know, if you have because you know, you're all experts in 40B now, you can't reduce density for its own purpose, and you can't require pro formas like developers show me the financials to justify why you can't do a smaller project. You can't do that. But if you had some compelling local concern, a health or safety concern, that lesser density would address, then those are conditions, you know, that are appropriate for you to apply. So that's one of the things I think that the opponents are getting at, is that if you have a less dense project, you have more of that natural area that Mr. Chesia is referring to. You have less impervious coverage. You have the ability to, for your treatment system to do a more adequate job that somebody can be satisfied with. So I think that's really it, is, you know, the developer is saying we comply with applicable standards. The opponents are saying they don't comply with applicable standards, and then you have to decide what to do with that information. And, you know, this is an evolving area, because even as David Gray said, they're just starting to now look at stormwater management systems. So it's something that the town is in the process of a more robust review. And I do think as part of this, kind of goes beyond your question a little bit, but you do have to look at those other projects like Tacoma. What exactly is proposed? You know, what impervious coverage is there? What type of acreage is there? What mitigation have they proposed? What is that system? So, you know, I would look to other projects, and remember too, if there's a project on that list that turns out, not to blame anybody, but if somebody missed something, you're not locked into a bad permit. Right. You know, you got to start somewhere in applying reasonable standards.
I don't know of any other project that is like the project that's being proposed, so I'm not so sure that naming other projects is comparing apples to apples.
That may well be the case.
It isn't.
Yeah, that may well be the case.
And I
think
don't
you have to
even
look
know,
at that.
it's not like they're proposing, well, maybe a way to, you know, deal with this is for it to be less dense. I think we should let the opponents of this speak for themselves. I don't know if that's really their point.
Yeah,
I don't know if that
we're
would
saying the degree of
appease-
impervious coverage, basically,
Right.
you can't comply. So, you know, obviously,
Right.
lesser density might address that. I mean,
So let's
There are a
give,
lot, like,
let's,
they could put in a
let's
big
give the,
system
let's
that could-
give the Nantucket Land and Water Council,
but
who's,
hopefully that answers Jim's question.
Yeah, and I did a poor job probably of analogizing, and I understand what they're saying, that this is how it's been applied, this is their interpretation. But we're not talking about like some building code change that, you know, they can get away with. Like, we're talking about water quality. So, you know, again, even though the regulations were okay to provide women with cigarettes who are pregnant, now we know that you can't just keep doing that. And is this that situation? Like,
Well, that's right.
Yes, I
yeah.
know.
Because if you have you have the sole source aquifer, so you have that unique situation here. With regard to PFAS and other types of contaminant issues, some towns don't have public water, they're septic systems and private water wells.
I know,
And many of those communities are facing issues of PFAS sort of out of control, that they've got to have point of entry treatment systems on their private systems. So different communities face different issues on this, but they're an issue that has come to light in the last couple of years because of PFAS issues.
Okay, I really want to hear from the response from the Nantucket Land and Water Council that's up next for their response to Bracken's responses to their original letter, so.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I do have Mr. Horsley and Mr. Reardon online.
Good.
Mr. Murphy, do you want them moved over?
Yes, please.
Thank
I'll
you.
introduce them just in 2 minutes if I could.
Sure.
Thank you, members of the board. Dennis Murphy on behalf of the Nantucket Land and Water Council. The system for stormwater that's been designed is a common conventional system. And based on what you've seen, you could approve 15% coverage. What they're asking for is extraordinary. They want 3.5 times that, and they've given you no reason to give them that extra. Our engineer, Sean Reardon, who actually designs stormwater systems, he says that this system doesn't even comply with the conventional regulations. So you can hear from them. He says it violates stormwater standards 5 and 6. Horsley, who is a water resource expert, says that they haven't even tried to do an analysis of whether there would be a degradation of the groundwater quality. Let me make one thing really clear. We're talking about simple mathematics. When you pave 6.5 acres of new impervious coverage, you increase the amount of coverage, that increases the amount of stormwater, and that increases the pollutant load. And the thing that's unique about this project is the magnitude of those increases. When you're talking about relief in a zone 2 on 1/10 of an acre, that is a very different risk to public health than when you're talking about it for 156 units on 6.5 new acres of impervious coverage. So I don't want to take up the time from Horsley and Reardon. I would like to hear from Scott first, if he's available. The one thing that I want to make clear in sort of plain English, the system that's proposed and before the board right now, to my inexpert way of thinking, doesn't show any enhancement for being in a zone 2. It's a conventional common system. And my response is, okay, here's your 15% coverage. Goodbye, that's it. If they can't persuade you that they're entitled to more, don't give them the waiver. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can you hear me? This is Scott Horsley.
Yes, yep,
With your permission, I'll proceed with some brief comments.
sure.
So I just have, I listened to the whole meeting here, and I've got 3 or 4 comments that I'll make rather quickly. First of all, I think this discussion about past practices, other projects, is a little bit of a distraction. I agree with all the comments that have been made. We don't know the size of those. We don't know how much traffic. We don't know what types of uses. So, and I do think Mr. Mondani, if I got your name correct, sir, made some really good points. And I think your analogy actually is quite good, because we are learning a lot about stormwater pollution. I cited, we talked about PFAS, but I cited another contaminant in my first letter, which frankly is just beginning to get talked about. It comes from tire rubber, something we didn't know about a year or 2 ago. There's a lot of pollutants in stormwater. And that gets to my second point. There are many pollutants. John Chesia mentioned total suspended solids. He's correct. The Mass DEP stormwater standards, and by the way, I was on the committee when those were, the Mass DEP committee when those were written, so I'm pretty familiar with them. The primary pollutant of concern in developing the standards was suspended solids. Those are particulates. Those are particles of soil, if you will. They're not hydrocarbons, pesticides, PFAS, oils, all that stuff was not part of the quantitative goal of developing these stormwater standards. So there's a lot of pollutants here to deal with. And again, I'm not going to, I guess I will repeat it. We're in a drinking water area. We're in a sole source drinking water area. So if we're going to try to protect drinking water anywhere, groundwater, this is a good place to start. My next point is the DEP Stormwater Handbook. We keep hearing about that. Again, I was involved in helping develop that along with a lot of other people. I think my sense of what the applicant is proposing here is that that's good enough. We meet the state stormwater standards, we're done. And I do recognize there's some language to that effect in the bylaw. However, there's other language, and the most important words I see are no degradation of water quality. That's a performance standard. It's a narrative performance standard. My view of that, much as Attorney Murphy just mentioned, is the applicant's burden of proof to show they meet that performance standard. And I can tell you they're not going to meet it using the conventional stormwater practices that are in the Mass DEP Stormwater Handbook, because that was not written to achieve the goal of no groundwater degradation. It was written to remove suspended solids, to take some of the pollutants out, 80% of the solids, not the other pollutants. So that's not going to get us there. I think the bylaw is pretty clear. My interpretation of it, which I had in the letter, is, and again, I think Attorney Murphy just said this well, up to 15%, the conventional practices are probably okay. Because what happens is we accept a certain level of pollutant loading, 15%, and maybe as a whole, that is okay, the low level of pollutant. However, if you triple it or more than triple it, the load of pollutants, and by load we mean kilograms per year of all these different pollutants, goes up by the same factor, by more than 3. These standard practices in the states are not going to remove that. There are some things, somebody mentioned carbon treatment earlier. There are permeable reactive barriers. There is material called char, which can be used to vegetative practices that can treat some of these pollutants. But as I said at the last meeting, those things are really expensive. And if I was going to design an affordable housing project where I'm trying to keep the costs down, I would try to find a place where I don't have to do that. And I wouldn't go to a zone 2 area in a sole source aquifer, especially one where there's a bylaw that says that my standard is no degradation. I interpret the word no as 0. That's a tough standard. Not a good place for a project where you're trying to keep the cost of treatment down. Could it be achieved? Maybe. We need an innovative design with some of the things we've heard about, perhaps some vegetated systems, activated carbon. It can be done. It would be super expensive. It's probably not the right place for this project, would be my guess. And I think I will stop there. Those are the comments that I want. Most of that was in my first letter. As I said in my second letter, which I responded to Mr. Bracken, I hear what he's saying, and I read the same bylaw, but his response later doesn't change any of my comments, my first letter. They still stand. I don't think this project meets the performance standard of no degradation. I don't think it meets the performance standard of 90% recharge. And it's on the burden of the developer to show that they can meet those standards. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Reardon?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Sean Reardon on behalf of the Nantucket Land Water Council. I share a lot of Scott's opinions and a lot of the opinions that were discussed earlier by Director Ouellette and Director Miramontes. Among those were prevention of contamination and the need for maintenance. And I'd like to sort of segue from that by sort of clarifying why the difference between what I feel is being proposed and what I feel is clearly required under the stormwater standards, and why that requirement makes sense in this application. So the stormwater standards recognize that areas such as zone 2s, areas that are near fisheries and things like that require an extra level of attention. It's maybe some debate as to whether it's a LUPL. I'm not going to argue that point. There can be no debate on whether this is in a zone 2. The zone 2 requires an extra level of treatment prior to discharge. The methods of treatment that are prescribed by the stormwater standards include vegetation and organic soils or filter media. Basically, it recognizes that Mother Nature does the best job of treating water quality. They're wetlands. Wetlands do a fantastic job of sort of taking out pollutants, removing nitrogen. So water filtering through a wetland does a great job of getting reduced pollutant loads prior to going into the groundwater. That's why Standard 6 and Standard 5 require methods that include vegetation, include organic filter media. So if you can imagine, prior to say 15 years ago, everything was a detention basin, a surface detention basin that had a lot of vegetation in it and a lot of organic medium, like soil that can bind up contaminants. Over the last decade or 2 decades, we've switched to these underground infiltration systems that have none of that. There's no organic filter, there's no vegetation. So all of a sudden we've got this Mother Nature who's been doing great for billions and billions of years with wetlands. And we said, all right, we're going to mimic our stormwater solutions based on that. But all of a sudden we're going to veer a hard right and just stick everything underground where nobody can see it and none of this organic media and none of this vegetation takes place. That's where I think the fundamental flaw in the current design is. There is no organic media, there is no vegetation that is capable of taking these pollutants out. Instead, it just introduces them down at a level where they're not going to be filtered through the media that's below the systems. So what I'd ask is that just people focus on the standard. The specific standard relates to 5 and 6, which says you have to use these measures that are specific to these types of treatments, which is usually includes vegetation and includes an organic media, as opposed to using underground infiltration, which has none of those things. So to answer, Director Willette's concerns and Director Miramonte's concerns, if they use the measures that are required, again, this is as a basic requirement of compliance with the standards, not anything that allows for additional density to Scott's point. These are basic minimum requirements. You would get that vegetation to treat out PFAS included. So vegetation and wetlands do a good job of filtering out PFAS. You would get that organic media. Under the current proposal, you're getting none of that. So my position is that the project must treat the stormwater using the methods required under the stormwater standards, and I don't believe they do so. Furthermore, we talked a lot about maintenance. It's great to have a plan, and I'm sure Don's plan in the stormwater report is comprehensive. In my experience, having a plan and having that plan followed are two fundamentally different things. The beautiful thing about the methods prescribed by the standards, the surface detention basins, very visible things that don't require a whole lot of inspection, very easy to clean. So again, we're moving in opposite directions here. Instead of building something that's easy to maintain and easy to identify if there's a problem, we're making it very difficult, if not impossible, to maintain, and then taking everything and putting it out of sight so it doesn't get caught in time. So my position is that the project has not met the basic standard required, and that basic standard makes perfect sense given all the comments that have been generated today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chesia, do you have any feedback for us on these 2 responses?
Yeah, I definitely understand what their points. I'm not a water quality expert, so I'm not going to comment on that. I think the interpretation of the stormwater handbook, I see where Mr. Reardner's coming from with those comments. That's not how I've interpreted in the past, or I think much of anyone. Maybe I'm not familiar with many people requiring the treatment system prior to the infiltration system for the zone 2s, but I'm not saying it's inappropriate necessarily. More treatment's always better. I'm just not 100% certain it's required under the stormwater regulation.
And if I could just follow up real quickly through the chair.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that any additional treatment is required. I'm suggesting that the measures used for treatment are limited to certain systems within zone 2. So these are not special measures. They're just, what they're doing is they're saying within zone 2s, we want you to use specific types, and types that include vegetation and organic filtering media.
Mr. Willett, do you have any additional comments at this time?
No, just that there hasn't been a water certificate issued yet. We got a bunch of information here from a bunch of groups. We're going to meet, David and I and some other directors will get together. Now we have an extended date, right? So that gives us a week or so that we can get together and review all this information and give you the information you're going to need to make the decision you have to make.
Okay.
And we'll take all of this under advisement and get back to you with the information that we believe is what you need. And if it's not, ask more questions and we'll get you what we can.
And so you'll be providing us the information that you would use and Mr. Gray would use to evaluate
Yes.
on whether you would issue either
Whether
issue
we
the
think
water
this is-
quality or
whether-
what questions you
Right,
would have
and we
on
can-
that.
We can work together. The three of us will get together and
Okay.
go over this information and come up with what we think.
Okay.
And if that includes, as was suggested, which I don't think is a bad idea either, an independent consultant to take a look at this. So it's not a one side or the other thing, but just a plain view of what this is, then maybe that's what we do.
Okay. And I guess asking the applicant then, since that has come up a few times from, I think now 3 or 4 town departments, is that something that you would be willing to do for this part of the process that is so, I don't want to say controversial, but just, there's a lot of new information, and would that be something that you would be willing to engage to help Mr. Willett, Mr. Gray, and the board understand how we move forward?
Yeah, well,
Well, he's right, I'm asking the applicant, actually, sorry, Mr. Willett. I know you would be happy with it.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to have to say that the applicant would not be willing to do that. I think that all of this discussion is outside the scope of the board's remand. As I noted earlier today, the scope of the board's remand is limited to the changes in the development from the original proposal to where we are now. The stormwater was not listed as an issue for review in the remand order issued by the Housing Appeals Committee. As Mr. Willett has acknowledged earlier in his earlier presentation, the amount of impervious is minimally different between the two projects. The stormwater system, the stormwater design is essentially the same between the two projects. There is no basis for the level of review that the board is looking to do, that the Land and Water Council is encouraging, because the two projects are essentially identical as it relates to stormwater. So there being no difference between the original project and the modified project, this is not an issue that is within the scope of this hearing.
George, I see you're standing there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so that's the applicant's response. They won't fund that. So then you deal with that. You have Mr. Willett and Mr. Gray and whoever else they want to talk to get back to you with their thoughts and comments after, the further information they've received. See where you're at that point. If you're, I don't know how you're going to come down on this. If it ends up that the only expert consultants you have are the ones that were from the applicant versus Land Council, you can then make the decision whose opinions you want to accept. You're free to do that. You could also seek from the town funding if you think that there's a consultant out there that could help you. You'll remember the first time around on the 40B, there was controversy over the natural heritage issues and the bats, and the town had to fund those experts that gave those opinions. So if you think that that's necessary, That's always something to look to. One thing that I will, and I don't want to get into the competing attorney thing again. One thing I'll definitely disagree with Attorney Haverty about, and we may end up having this disagreement at Housing Appeals Committee, is through no fault of the town or the board or anybody other than HAC and the applicant, this conversation is happening 4 years after the fact. And in my opinion, the extraordinary time that's passed between the time this should have been remanded to you in the first instance and now enables you to consider current circumstances and new information. So I do, in my opinion, this is well within the scope of your jurisdiction and authority. But again, if they refuse to fund it, that doesn't mean that you just pack up your bag and go home. It means you deal with that. So if they're refusing to do that, then you deal with the information that you have before you on the record. But in my opinion, again, due to the passage of time, it's definitely within your jurisdiction to be looking at these issues.
I also just think that the discussion we had, so the plan that came back to us that we did the review in June of 2023, that plan had the 156 condos. That was not, it was not what was, it wasn't the last plan that was before us. It wasn't the plan that we issued our comp permit with conditions on. So that plan being, you know, being told that we had to do the technical review on that one, which we did, then, you know, then that gets remanded because it was deemed a substantial change. When I read this, the scope of review for our, for this process, that plan, that 156, that change from mixed single-family homes and condos, however it landed, the change of it and the size of the buildings and all of that, that triggers the review. So
yeah,
I think we keep being told like we don't have the ability to review this, but the 156 condo plan was deemed by the court to be a substantial change to what we had approved. So we're not defaulting back to that plan.
I'm going to anticipate your question, Susan. You're absolutely right, because this also came up with, you know, fire department commented before, police chief. It's irrelevant. You never had the chance. Never mind the compliance review. That's different.
Right.
That was in the context that you had a viable permit before you. They were proceeding at risk in opposite, you know, despite the fact that there were
right. So that whole review kind of happened in a vacuum, and it gets put aside.
That has nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
This review should have taken place 4 years ago on remand. So you're looking at it at this time. And again, you can't discount the 4 years, because that's why your fire chief can comment on this, your police chief. It matters to you what they're saying now.
Well, I mean, how many of the department heads that got up to speak today said, well, I wasn't here when this started. We've you know, so much time has gone by. We have new people in these positions,
So-
which I actually appreciate because it's a fresh set of eyes, which is
So
great.
you just have to remember that, and it's not that hard to conceptualize. It's just that this should have come before you 4 years ago. And that's the scope of your review now.
Yeah, okay. I see we're at 4 o'clock, so I know, Elisa, did you want to?
I just want to quickly say that there is a lot more going on here than just wondering about the water quality and who's right and who's more right. There's also, and I think we heard from the different heads of the different departments, and nobody said this is perfectly fine. I feel like I'm still not completely trusting the traffic study from 2018 compared to what it's about to be with the impact of the new island home and this new development. I'm not sure that, you know, there's nowhere to put a second entrance at a completely different end of this development, so I'm not confident in it being safe if there's a big fire. I'm also not confident with all the parking that is going to happen on this property with overflow, that all of these cars aren't going to be in the way of fire trucks. I'm not clear, because of the scale of this and the unbelievable density. I'm just not sure of so many things. So I don't want to pin it just on the issue of clean and healthy and safe drinking water, which is at the top of the list. But I think there is, not to mention the long list of the waivers that you're asking for, there are a lot of layers to this situation that just don't feel like you're complying, and you're not thinking of the best interest of the community, the property, the water, and the people that are going to be living there. There are too many human factors in this that are not being considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just get one clarification since we have the two presenters?
Yes, and then we got to wrap up.
It's just a quick question.
Sure.
So it's for either of you.
You mean Mr. Horsley and Mr. Reardon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then maybe Mr. Reardon, so what you call the vegetation and all, that's and you use the wetland example. That's a fancy way of saying a detention pond. And could that be calculated? Would we be able to know how big that detention pond would need to be for this?
Yes, because it would need to treat the 1-inch water quality volume, and it would be sized accordingly. And there's descriptions within the standards and within the handbooks for how you meet that standard. And I would argue that's a minimum standard for compliance with the stormwater standards.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we are unfortunately at the end of our time, although I think we didn't get to everything we hoped to. We did have a really productive conversation. So our next meeting for this is on Friday, the 24th at 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And I think where we would pick up is if there's any response or additional information from Brooks and Durensis, Nantucket Tipping Point. We do need to get to the architectural review. And I have a bunch of notes in the side. Billy, I will talk with you about stuff that we either want to request or get, or as we've gone through these 10 pages of notes that I have.
Madam Chair?
Yep.
So we will be the first item out?
I can't guarantee that because I don't know what's going to come in, but I will definitely, you'll be in the front because I know we didn't get to you today, and
We've been waiting all day.
I know you have, and
We've got a big presentation.
I appreciate that, and I apologize that we've run out of time. So I'll work with Billy to make sure that you are early on I just don't know what else would come up if we get any additional feedback from department heads, or I don't know, but I'll have you go early. I just can't guarantee you first on the agenda.
We have to coordinate witnesses. We have to
I know, I
coordinate presentation, we need
apologize.
to
I
prepare.
apologize. We only had 3 hours today, and I really wanted to get through the water issues and the department heads. So I can promise you an early spot on the agenda for the 24th. Okay, my apologies again. And so I think we can, if there's.
You need to continue to.
I know, but
to
I
the
see Mr. Haverty, did you?
Madam
Okay,
Chair.
all right, so I would take a motion to continue this hearing to January 24th, 2025 at 1 p.m. in person in this room and via Zoom.
So moved.
Okay, John makes the motion. I think Elisa seconded. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And we'll do roll call vote. So John?
Aye.
Elisa? Jim?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
And myself. Okay, so that is continued. And then I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, John makes the motion. Elisa seconds. Again, we'll do roll call. John?
Aye.
Elisa? Lisa?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
And myself, aye. Okay, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and I apologize to those people we did not get to today. We will get to you next time.
Who's coming? Who's here now? Who's coming in now? Select board?